The first whisper cut across Wetherbourne House before the candles had finished being lit. "The Duke means to choose a wife tonight." By 9 o'clock, every mother in Mayfair had heard it. Every daughter had been tightened into silk, and every ambitious family with a passable invitation had arrived beneath the carved stone portico, as if marriage itself waited at the top of the steps. No one called it a bride selection where the Dowager Duchess might hear. They called it a rout, a musical evening, a gathering of old friends, an opportunity for suitable acquaintance. But behind fans, behind gloved hands, behind smiles too polished, to be honest, London had already named it what it was. The bride selection. Miss Rosalind Fairbourne knew the phrase before her. Carriage reached Grosvenor Square, because her stepsister Sybil had repeated it at least 6 times on the ride, each time with a sharper shine in her eyes. "Of course it won't be said aloud," Sybil murmured, adjusting the pearls at her throat. "People of rank don't need to say everything. They simply understand." Lavinia, younger by 11 months and twice as vain, leaned toward the carriage window to catch her reflection in the dark glass. "If His Grace has any taste at all, he'll notice the blue silk before supper." Lady Priscilla Fairbourne tapped her fan against her wrist. "His Grace will notice breeding, posture, fortune, and obedience. Beauty may assist, but it must never appear to be begging." Her gaze moved to Rosalind as if she had discovered a crease in the upholstery. "And you, Rosalind, will remember why you were brought." Rosalind sat opposite them with her hands folded over the ivory skirt of her gown. The silk was old, but not shabby. She had spent 3 evenings strengthening the seams by candlelight, turning the hem where it had frayed, and setting a narrow ivory ribbon along the bodice to soften the plainness. The ribbon had belonged to her mother. That alone made Lady Priscilla dislike it. "Yes, ma'am," Rosalind said. "You'll attend your sisters if they require anything. A shawl, a pin, a glass of lemonade. You will not wander. You will not attempt clever conversation. You will not draw His Grace's notice by looking tragic in old silk." "I'm not tragic," Rosalind said softly. Sybil smiled. "No, dear, tragedy requires an audience." Lavinia laughed under her breath, and Lady Priscilla did not correct her. Rosalind looked down at the ribbon beneath her fingers. It had once trimmed her mother's favorite evening gown, the one in the miniature portrait, hidden inside Rosalind's writing box. Her mother had worn it before illness thinned her face, and grief entered Fairbourne Hall like a permanent winter. Rosalind remembered very little from those final months except the smell of lavender water, the soft rasp of silk, and one weak hand pressing the ribbon into hers. "Keep something beautiful," her mother had whispered, "even if they tell you beauty is not meant for you." Wetherbourne House blazed with candlelight when they entered. The great hall rose above them in pale marble and carved oak, its staircase sweeping upward beneath portraits of Ainsley ancestors who looked as if they had disapproved of England for 3 centuries. Footmen in dark livery took cloaks. A butler announced names with solemn precision. Music drifted from the drawing room, light and elegant, almost cheerful enough to disguise the hunger in the air. Rosalind followed 2 steps behind her family. That was where she had learned to walk, not beside, not before, behind. Sybil and Lavinia floated ahead in blue and rose, their gowns new from a fashionable modiste, their gloves spotless, their curls dressed with pearls. Lady Priscilla paused before the drawing-room doors, surveyed them both, then touched Sybil's chin with one gloved finger. "Remember, a duke is not won by eagerness. He is won by appearing already certain of one's worth." Then she turned to Rosalind. "Stand where you may be useful." The drawing-room was crowded with rank, perfume, and ambition. Chandeliers poured gold over satin shoulders. Mothers watched like generals. Young ladies played at indifference while arranging themselves beneath the most flattering light. The Dowager Duchess of Wetherbourne sat near the hearth in silver-grey silk, upright and unsmiling, with eyes that missed nothing. She was said to have invited only families whose bloodlines, fortunes, or usefulness could bear examination. Rosalind suspected that the Fairbournes had been admitted because Lady Priscilla had once been Lady Priscilla Vane, daughter of an earl, and because Sybil's beauty had been praised in 3 drawing rooms before Easter. No one had invited Rosalind. She had merely come attached to the others, like a necessary pin hidden inside a sleeve. "There," Lady Priscilla whispered, "near the palm. Do not block the view." Rosalind obeyed. From her place beside a tall potted palm, she could see most of the room and be seen by almost no one. It was a familiar arrangement. Her father, the late Sir Edmund Fairbourne, had once called her his quiet star, but after his death quiet had become a convenience. She kept household lists. She mended lace. She read letters aloud to Lady Priscilla when the older woman claimed her eyes were tired. She soothed Lavinia's tempers, found Sybil's lost ribbons, and remembered which neighbours must not be seated near one another at dinner. Competence had made her indispensable. It had not made her loved. A small commotion near the doorway drew attention. A plump elderly lady had dropped one of her gloves and was struggling to bend without disturbing the ridiculous tower of feathers on her turban. 2 young men noticed and turned away. A girl nearby looked embarrassed for her but did not move. Rosalind stepped from her palm-shadowed post, retrieved the glove, and saw at once that 2 pearl buttons had come loose. "May I?" she asked. The lady blinked at her. "My dear, you needn't trouble yourself." "It's no trouble." Rosalind drew a tiny needle case from her reticule. Lady Priscilla called such habits unbecoming, but someone in the Fairbourne household always needed mending, and no one else carried the means to do it. "I can secure it before the next set begins." The lady studied her face, then smiled with real relief. "You're very kind. Only prepared," Rosalind said. Kindness and preparation are often the same thing when one is old enough to know better. The voice was dry, amused, and older. "I am Lady Marchvale, child." "And you are Miss Rosalind Fairbourne?" "Fairbourne." Lady Marchvale's gaze sharpened. "Sir Edmund's daughter?" Rosalind's throat tightened. Few people remembered her father without being prompted. "Yes, my lady. He had honest eyes. It is rarer than beauty and less rewarded." Rosalind fastened the final button. "Then I am glad someone remembers it." Lady Marchvale looked at her for one lingering moment, as if she had heard more than the words. Across the room, Sybil's laugh rose too brightly. Rosalind glanced over and found her stepsister watching. Sybil's smile remained lovely, but it had hardened at the corners. Lady Marchvale thanked Rosalind and returned to her circle. Before Rosalind could retreat fully behind the palm, a shadow shifted at the top of the staircase beyond the open doors. The conversations near the entrance thinned. Fans paused. Heads turned, one by one as if pulled by a single string. His Grace Benedict Ainsley, Duke of Wetherbourne, had appeared without announcement. He was taller than Rosalind expected. Dressed in black evening clothes cut with severe perfection, his dark hair untouched by fashionable softness. He did not hurry. He did not smile. He descended the staircase as though the house, the guests, and the entire impatient machinery of the season existed by his permission but not for his pleasure. The room altered around him. Mothers straightened. Daughters lowered their lashes. Gentlemen adjusted their shoulders. Even Lady Priscilla drew a breath that sounded like calculation. "There," Sybil whispered, though Rosalind was too far to be the intended listener. "That is a duke." Rosalind looked away at once. Men like that were not meant to notice women like her. They were meant to choose beauty, fortune, and obedience from among polished families, while everyone pretended romance had wandered in by accident. She returned the needle to her reticule and smoothed her glove. The ivory ribbon at her bodice caught lightly against the clasp. She freed it with care. When she looked up again, the Duke was not watching Sybil in blue or Lavinia in rose. He was speaking to an older gentleman near the staircase, yet his eyes had moved past the line of eager faces and settled briefly and unmistakably on Rosalind. Not with admiration. Not yet. With curiosity, it lasted only a heartbeat. Rosalind told herself she had imagined it. Then Sybil appeared at her side, smiling as if they were dear sisters sharing a secret. How touching, she said, her voice sweet enough to fool anyone at a distance. Mending gloves for old women now. You do know this is not a servants' hall. Rosalind closed her reticule. Lady Marchvale needed assistance. Lady Marchvale needed to be seen speaking to someone else. You mistook it for affection. Lavinia joined them, bringing the scent of rosewater and triumph. And what is this ribbon? I noticed it in the carriage, but candlelight makes it worse. Her fingers hovered near Rosalind's bodice. Rosalind stepped back before she could touch it. It was my mother's. Sybil's expression changed, not softened, sharpened. That explains the drama of it. There is no drama in a ribbon. There is when a poor relation wears memory as if it were rank. Rosalind felt the words land, but she did not lower her eyes. I was not aware remembrance required permission. Lavinia gave a small laugh. Listen to her. One conversation with an old lady, and she thinks she's interesting. Lady Priscilla approached before Rosalind could answer. Enough. Sybil, Lord Enderby has asked to be introduced. Lavinia, smile less widely. Rosalind, back to the palm. She paused, noticing the ribbon. Her mouth tightened. You should not have worn that. It belonged to my mother, Rosalind said. Precisely. Lady Priscilla's tone was smooth as a closed door. The dead should not be used to petition the living. Sybil leaned close as their stepmother turned away. Borrowed dignity from a dead woman is still borrowed. For a moment, Rosalind could not breathe. The music seemed to draw farther away. Around her, London laughed, courted, flattered, and measured worth by silk and blood and the angle of a duke's glance. She stood very still, one hand over the ivory ribbon, and decided that if the evening meant to make her small, it would have to work harder than that. Across the room, from the foot of the staircase, the Duke of Wetherbourne watched the exchange he could not hear. He saw the two sisters smile. He saw Lady Priscilla turn away. He saw Rosalind remain upright when another woman might have fled. Then he leaned slightly toward his steward and asked, in a voice too low for the room, but not too low for fate, "Who is the lady mending another woman's glove?" The steward did not answer at once, and in that hesitation, Benedict Ainsley learned more than a name could have told him. Mr. Vale had served Wetherbourne House for 27 years. He knew every family that crossed its threshold, every fortune that had begun to rot beneath fresh silk, every ambitious mother who smiled with her teeth and calculated with her eyes. If he hesitated, it meant the woman near the palm belonged to a story no one wished to tell plainly. "Miss Rosalind Fairbourne, Your Grace," he said at last. "Daughter of the late Sir Edmund Fairbourne." Benedict kept his gaze on the room, and the two peacocks beside Lady Priscilla, her stepsisters, Miss Sybil Fairbourne in blue, Miss Lavinia Fairbourne in rose. They look expensive. Mr. Vale gave the smallest cough. They are intended to. Across the drawing room, the Dowager Duchess lifted 2 fingers from her fan. It was not a summons. Most sons would have obeyed after the age of 34. But the Dowager had never wasted a gesture in her life. Benedict crossed to her, because refusing would only prolong the evening. She watched him approach with the calm severity of a woman who had survived one duke, raised another, and buried every illusion society had tried to sell her. "You are late," she said. "I am in my own house, a poor defense. Hosts may be late only when they are beloved. You are feared, which requires punctuality. Then I shall endeavor to terrify them on schedule next time." Her eyes moved toward the room, where young ladies pretended not to watch him. "You understand why they are here. To play, sing, flatter, and be assessed like hunters at Tattersall's. Do not be vulgar. I was being accurate." The Dowager closed her fan. "Wetherbourne needs a duchess. You need a wife capable of managing this house when I am dead, which I have no immediate intention of becoming. You also require someone who will not tremble every time you enter a room." Benedict looked again toward Miss Fairbourne. She had returned to her place near the palm, but not to stillness. A young girl of perhaps 12 stood before her, cheeks pink with distress. One sleeve caught awkwardly where a bit of lace had torn loose. Miss Fairbourne bent her head, said something that made the child breathe again. and repaired the damage with the same needle case she had used for Lady Marchvale's glove. No audience. No performance. No upward glance to see whether anyone important had noticed. "That one does not tremble," he said. The dowager followed his gaze. Rosalind Fairbourne, there was a note in his mother's voice he could not place, not disapproval, curiosity sharpened by caution. "You know her? I knew her mother, a gentle woman. Too gentle for the house she entered. That sounds like a warning. Most truths do." Before Benedict could ask more, Lady Priscilla approached with Sybil, arranged at her side, like a jewel in a velvet case. Lavinia followed half a step behind, smiling too widely. Lady Priscilla sank into a curtsy perfectly measured to acknowledge ducal rank without appearing desperate. "Your Grace." "Your Grace's hospitality honors us all." "Does it?" Benedict asked. Sybil blinked. Lady Priscilla recovered quickly. "Exceedingly. My daughter Sybil has been hoping to thank the Dowager Duchess for including us." The Dowager inclined her head. "How gracious." Sybil stepped forward. She was undeniably pretty, with golden curls, pale skin, and the sort of eyes often praised by men who did not listen long enough to discover whether anything lived behind them. "Your Grace," she said, dipping gracefully, "Wetherbourne House is more beautiful than any description could prepare one for." "Descriptions are often unreliable," Benedict replied, "especially when offered by people hoping to be invited back." A flicker passed through Sybil's smile. Lavinia made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been strangled by nerves. Lady Priscilla intervened. "Sybil is accomplished at the pianoforte. Lady Marchvale particularly admired her last season." "Did she?" Benedict glanced toward Lady Marchvale, who was now speaking to another matron and looked entirely innocent of recent admiration. "Then we must not deprive the room." It was crueler than he intended, or perhaps only more honest. Sybil could not refuse. Within minutes, she sat at the pianoforte beneath a circle of approving mothers and watchful daughters. The piece she chose was elegant, fashionable, and played without a single mistake. It was also empty. Her fingers struck every note correctly and offered nothing of herself. Benedict listened because he had been raised to endure social obligations without visible impatience. Yet his attention drifted. Miss Fairbourne stood beside the young girl whose sleeve she had mended, listening with a composed face. The child whispered something. Miss Fairbourne leaned closer, smiled once, and gave a tiny shake of her head, as if discouraging mischief. It was not a flirtatious smile. It was not polished. It was warm, then gone. When the final note sounded, applause rose with relief. Sybil turned to Benedict as if expecting a verdict. "Very precise," he said. Sybil's smile stiffened. "Thank you, Your Grace. Precision is a rare discipline." The compliment was not false. It was merely insufficient for what she wanted. Lady Priscilla's eyes cooled by a fraction. Lavinia, perhaps deciding her sister had not dazzled enough, drifted toward Benedict later with a plate of sugared almonds. "Your Grace, my sister plays with such feeling, doesn't she?" Benedict looked at the plate, then at her. "Does she? Everyone says so." "Everyone is a crowded authority." Lavinia flushed, but she recovered with a bright little laugh. "I'm afraid you must find us all silly." "Not all." His gaze moved beyond her before he could stop it. Miss Fairbourne had crouched slightly to retrieve a sheet of music a nervous debutante had dropped. The girl looked near tears, perhaps because her own turn had come. Miss Fairbourne did not fuss over her. She simply placed the music in order and murmured, "Begin with the second page if your hands are cold. It sounds harder than it is, and no one here knows the difference except the accompanist." The girl stared, then gave a breathless laugh. Benedict's mouth almost moved. Lavinia saw where he was looking. Her flush drained into something paler. "Rosalind is very useful at little things," she said. "It is fortunate, since she has so few large claims." Benedict turned back to her. The words had been offered lightly, wrapped in a laugh, sharpened for anyone with ears. "Usefulness is a large claim, Miss Lavinia. Larger than ornament." Her face changed as if he had closed a door too softly for anyone else to hear. "I didn't mean anything unkind. Then you will be relieved that I did not hear anything admirable. Silence opened around them, small but unmistakable. Lady Priscilla noticed. So did Sybil. So did Rosalind, though she looked away at once, as if embarrassed to be the subject of a defense she had not requested. Benedict disliked himself briefly for causing her discomfort while attempting to prevent it. Society was built that way. Even kindness, badly aimed, could become another light forced upon someone who had not chosen it. The dowager watched him with interest. You are sharper than usual tonight. They are duller than usual. No, you are paying attention. That was worse because it was true. Benedict stepped away before his mother could say more and crossed toward the side table, where lemonade and wine had been set beneath the supervision of a footman. Miss Fairbourne arrived at the same moment, carrying an empty glass for Lady Marchvale. Up close, she was not striking in the obvious manner London praised. Her beauty was quieter and more dangerous for being unannounced. Grey eyes, steady mouth, brown hair arranged without extravagance, and a face that seemed trained to reveal little until kindness betrayed it. The ivory ribbon at her bodice was old, but carefully preserved, he said. She stilled. Not a flinch. A bracing. Your Grace, Lady Marchvale appears to have made you her quartermaster, only for lemonade. A demanding office. I find small offices are usually the ones that prevent large disasters. Do you? A torn glove can sour a lady's temper. A lost sheet of music can ruin a girl's first performance. A missing pin can alter a gown at the wrong moment. Society calls such things minor because it expects someone else to notice them. Benedict looked at her more fully. And you notice them. I am often placed where there is nothing else to do. The answer was calm. Too calm. It contained no self-pity, which somehow made it more difficult to dismiss. That sounds like a punishment. Not always. Corners give one a useful view. And what have you seen from yours tonight? She glanced toward the room. Lady Priscilla was speaking with a matron near the mantel. As Rosalind's gaze passed over her, Lady Priscilla slipped a folded packet deeper into her reticule with a quickness that did not match her languid smile. Rosalind saw it. Benedict saw Rosalind see it. Something shifted in her face, so slight most men would have missed it. The softness vanished. Thought entered. I have seen that everyone here wants something, she said. That is not rare. No, Your Grace. But some want to be chosen, and some want not to be discovered. Benedict followed her gaze, but Lady Priscilla had already turned, her reticule clasped tightly beneath her fan. You speak dangerously, Miss Fairbourne. I speak quietly. Quietly is often worse. For the first time, she almost smiled. Then I shall be careful. I did not ask you to be careful. No. But women in corners learn it anyway. The words struck him with an unexpected force. Before he could answer, Lady Priscilla's voice cut smoothly through the space between them. Rosalind, Lady Marchvale is waiting. The reminder was soft enough for manners and sharp enough for command. Rosalind curtsied. Your Grace. She turned away with the lemonade glass. Benedict watched her go, aware that Lavinia had retreated to Sybil near the window, their heads bent together. Sybil's fan hid her mouth, but not the anger in her eyes. He spoke to her, Lavinia whispered, twice. Sybil's smile returned, brittle and bright. Then we must make certain he regrets looking a third time. Benedict did not hear the words, but he saw the shape of conspiracy form between them. Across the room, Miss Rosalind Fairbourne handed Lady Marchvale her lemonade and stepped once more into the shadow of the palm, unaware that she had become the most interesting person in Wetherbourne House. The Dowager Duchess waited until Sybil's last compliment had failed to land, and the musicians had begun a brighter air before she rose from her chair near the hearth. She did not lift her voice. She did not need to. The room quieted around her as though her silence had weight. Since so many young ladies have honored Wetherbourne House tonight, she said, I believe we shall have a promenade before supper. Conversation reveals what music conceals, and movement is kinder to nerves than being stared at beneath a chandelier. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. No one mistook the purpose. Mothers arranged daughters as if setting jewels in cases. Gentlemen shifted to make a path through the long drawing room and into the adjoining gallery, where candles had been placed in tall silver branches and winter flowers stood in porcelain urns. The promenade would allow His Grace to speak briefly with whomever he chose. It would also allow the whole room to decide which women had been chosen to be seen. Rosalind stepped back at once. Her place was not in the line of hopeful ladies. She understood that before Lady Priscilla turned and gave the smallest warning glance. Sybil took her position with graceful confidence, blue silk gleaming beneath candlelight. Lavinia joined her in rows, cheeks bright with a mixture of nerves and calculation. Lady Priscilla moved between them, murmuring last instructions with a smile that would have looked tender to anyone who did not know her. "Do not reach for him," she whispered. "Let him approach." "Sybil, tilt your face when you answer." "Lavinia, don't laugh before he says something amusing." Lavinia's mouth tightened. "What if he doesn't say anything amusing?" "Then laugh with your eyes, child." Men of rank prefer to believe themselves understood. Rosalind turned away before she could hear more. She had carried Lady Marchvale's empty glass back to the side table and was searching for a place to leave it when a footman approached with a tray. His gloved hand trembled enough that 2 glasses chimed. He was young, perhaps newly hired for the evening, and his panic was made worse by trying to hide it. "Allow me," Rosalind said softly, taking 1 glass before it could fall. "Set the tray down first. No one will notice if you move slowly." "Thank you, miss," he whispered. "I'm sorry, miss. No harm has been done." She placed the glass safely on the table. "There. Now you have prevented a disaster before it became one." The footman exhaled. At the far end of the room, Benedict saw the exchange. He had been trapped for several minutes between Lady Priscilla's sharp attentions and the Dowager's expectations. Yet his gaze returned to Miss Fairbourne as if drawn by a question he had not yet learned how to ask. She moved through the evening like a hand repairing a torn seam. No flourish, no demand. Everywhere she passed, something was steadier afterward. That, he thought, was rarer than beauty. Lady Priscilla noticed his attention and felt it like a threat. "Rosalind," she called, sweetly enough to keep the room from hearing the command beneath it. Sybil's shawl. Rosalind crossed to her stepsister. "You left it on the chair near the palm." "Then fetch it," Sybil said. "I'm chilled." Her shoulders were bare above the blue silk, but her skin showed no sign of cold. Rosalind retrieved the shawl and placed it carefully over Sybil's arms. Sybil caught her wrist for the briefest instant. The pressure was hidden by folds of silk. "You are looking too pleased with yourself," she murmured. "I am not pleased." "Then don't look calm." "It has the same effect." Rosalind withdrew her hand without tugging. "You asked for the shawl, and now I have it." Sybil's smile brightened as Benedict approached the line. "Go back where you belong." Rosalind stepped aside. The promenade began with the Dowager's approval. Pairs and clusters moved through the gallery in measured fashion. There was no dancing yet, but the social rules were no less exacting. A lady could speak if introduced. A gentleman could pause if interested. A mother could hover without appearing to hunt. Benedict endured 3 conversations about music, 2 about the weather, and 1 about a family estate in Kent, where the speaker seemed uncertain whether wheat or sheep were involved. Sybil performed better than most. She spoke of charitable visits with delicate sadness and of household management with confidence borrowed from servants who had done the work. Benedict listened. He asked 1 question about the accounts of the charity she praised. Sybil's lashes flickered. "Lady Priscilla manages such practical details. I feel the suffering more than the sums." "Suffering is often improved by sums," Benedict said. Her smile faltered only for a moment. Lavinia fared worse. She praised Wetherbourne House, then praised the musicians, then praised the Dowager, and finally praised the weather for not raining on the carriages. Benedict gave her nothing to hold. Rosalind watched from near the side table, wishing she did not feel the injustice of it. Her sisters had been trained for this. They had been dressed for it, financed for it, praised into believing they deserved it. Yet their conversation had the depth of painted porcelain. Rosalind had no right to think so. That was what Lady Priscilla would say. A poor stepdaughter did not earn the luxury of judgment. She returned her attention to a loosened thread on her glove. Then Lady Marchvale touched her elbow. "Walk with me a few steps, Miss Fairbourne. My lady, I should not intrude." Nonsense. An old woman may choose her own support before supper. Rosalind had no polite way to refuse. She offered her arm, and Lady Marchvale drew her into the edge of the promenade. It was a small movement, but it changed everything. Rosalind was no longer hidden by the palm. She was visible in the gallery, her old ivory gown among new silks, her mother's ribbon catching a thin line of candlelight. Sybil saw, Lavinia saw. Lady Priscilla's face did not change, but the fan in her hand closed with a soft snap. "There," Lady Marchvale said under her breath. "You see? The ceiling has not fallen because you walked where people might look at you." Rosalind almost smiled. "Not yet. Give London time. It enjoys making disasters of harmless things." Benedict turned at the sound of Lady Marchvale's voice. His eyes found Rosalind at once. This time he did not look away quickly. The attention was not improper. It was not even long enough to invite comment from anyone who had not already been watching him. But Sybil had been watching. Lavinia had been watching. Lady Priscilla had trained them both to notice danger before it took form. The promenade shifted as couples adjusted around the flower urns. Lady Marchvale paused to greet an acquaintance, leaving Rosalind momentarily beside the central path. Sybil approached from one side with Lavinia drifting behind, both smiling as if they had simply been carried by the crowd. "Rosalind," Sybil said, her voice light. "How brave of you to join us. Lady Marchvale required my arm." "Of course she did. You are so very useful." Lavinia circled half a step behind. "Your ribbon is crooked." Rosalind's hand lifted instinctively, then stopped. She remembered the way Lavinia had looked at the ribbon before. "Please leave it." "Don't be silly." "I'm helping." "I said leave it." The firmness in her own voice surprised her. It surprised Lavinia too. For one breath, the younger girl's smile vanished. Then Sybil moved closer, blocking Rosalind from the wider room with her blue silk and bright hair. "Careful," Sybil whispered. "People might think you have pride. Perhaps I do." The words came quietly, but they came. Sybil's eyes hardened. "Then let us see how well it fits." It happened with the terrible swiftness of something planned. Sybil shifted as if to make room for a passing matron, placing her slipper squarely on the back edge of Rosalind's hem. At the same instant, Lavinia's fingers caught the ribbon and the hidden fastening beneath it. She pulled, not with a great motion, but with a sharp little twist concealed by her fan. The old silk gave way. A sound like a sigh turned into a rip that carried through the gallery. Rosalind felt the back seam open. Then came a sting at her shoulder, where a loosened pin scratched skin beneath the fabric. It was not serious. It was enough to make her gasp. The promenade stopped, not all at once. First those nearest turned, then those behind them. Then the room seemed to understand that something had happened to a woman who could not afford for anything to happen. Rosalind gathered the torn fabric against herself with both hands. The ruined back of the gown had exposed more of the plain underlayer than modesty allowed in a public drawing room, though nothing truly indecent had occurred. That did not matter. Society did not require truth in order to punish. It required only a shape it could call scandal. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else whispered her name. The music stumbled, then ceased. Rosalind stood in the center of Wetherbourne's gallery, with her mother's silk hanging broken around her and every eye in the room finding a place to land. Sybil stepped away, one hand to her mouth. "Rosalind," she breathed. "What have you done?" Lavinia's face was pale, but triumph glittered beneath the fear. Near Rosalind's feet, a torn strip of ivory ribbon lay curled against the polished floor. Rosalind reached for it with one shaking hand, but a satin slipper brushed it aside. When she looked again, it was gone. Lady Priscilla arrived as if summoned by fate itself. Her expression held shock, concern, and accusation in perfect balance. "My dear child," she said, loudly enough for the nearest guests, "why would you wear a gown so fragile to such an important evening? I warned you that old things cannot always bear attention." The words settled into the silence. Old things, fragile. Attention. Rosalind understood the trap. If she protested, she would appear hysterical. If she wept, she would appear guilty. If she fled, the story would be finished before morning. She drew the torn fabric higher and forced her spine straight. Her shoulder stung, her face burned, her mother's ribbon was gone, but she did not bow her head. Across the gallery, Benedict Ainsley had gone completely still. He had seen Lavinia's hand withdraw too quickly. He had seen Sybil's foot shift from the hem. He had seen the thin red mark near Rosalind's shoulder before she covered it. The room waited for laughter, pity, or dismissal. The Duke gave them none of those. He crossed the gallery in silence, each step cutting through the whispering crowd, and as Rosalind stood alone with torn silk clenched in her hands, Benedict reached for the clasp at his throat and removed his cloak. Benedict removed the cloak with a calm so absolute that it seemed to rebuke the entire room. The garment fell from his shoulders in one dark sweep, lined in deep grey silk and still warm from him. Rosalind saw it before she understood what he meant to do. She also saw the faces beyond him, the parted lips, the glittering eyes, the first eager expressions of women who had come hoping for romance and found scandal instead. Lady Priscilla had not moved from Rosalind's side. Sybil stood a few feet away with one hand pressed to her mouth, performing horror so prettily that half the room might have believed her. Lavinia had retreated behind a vase of white flowers, but her gaze clung to the torn gown with frightened satisfaction. "Your Grace," Lady Priscilla began, "there is no need for you to trouble yourself. My stepdaughter has been careless, but we shall remove her at once." Benedict did not look at her. "Madam, I decide what constitutes trouble beneath my own roof." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They travelled through the gallery, with the sharpness of a blade laid flat upon a table. Rosalind's hands tightened on the torn silk. She could feel the ruined seam pulling beneath her fingers. The scratch near her shoulder stung in tiny pulses, more humiliating than painful, because it proved her body had become evidence before she had been given permission to speak. Benedict stopped before her, not too close, close enough to shield her from the worst of the staring, far enough that no one could accuse him of impropriety, beyond the mercy the moment required. His eyes lowered only to the fabric she clutched, then to the small mark at her shoulder, then back to her face. He saw too much. That was the first thing that frightened her. The second was that he did not appear pleased by what he saw. He appeared angry, and the anger was not directed at her. "Miss Fairbourne," he said, "may I place this around your shoulders?" The question struck harder than any command would have done. No one had asked her anything since the rip. Not whether she was hurt, not whether she wished to leave, not whether she could breathe beneath the weight of so many eyes. Her voice nearly failed, but she found it. "Yes, Your Grace." He lifted the cloak and settled it over her with careful hands. He did not touch her skin. He did not fuss or arrange her like a helpless child. He simply gave her covering, then let her gather the edges herself. The wool was heavy, fine, and faintly scented with cold air and clean starch. It swallowed the broken ivory silk, the torn ribbon the shame Sybil had meant to display, but it did not make Rosalind disappear. Somehow, beneath the Duke's cloak, she felt more visible than before. Benedict fastened nothing until he asked again. "The clasp rests high. Shall I secure it?" Rosalind looked at him then. His expression was severe, but his voice had softened in a way no one behind him could have heard. "Please," she said. His fingers closed the clasp at her throat. The gesture took less than a breath. The silence afterward seemed to last a full minute. Lady Priscilla recovered first. "Your Grace is most generous. We are mortified that such an incident should have disturbed your evening." "Rosalind, come, we shall use the side passage." "No," Benedict said. Lady Priscilla blinked. "I beg your pardon." "I said no." He turned then, not abruptly, but with enough force in the movement that several guests stepped back without thinking. Miss Fairbourne will not be hidden through a servant's passage as if she has committed an offence. A faint murmur broke near the archway and died at once when Benedict looked toward it. This is Wetherbourne House. No lady under my roof will be made into sport. Rosalind felt the word sound more firmly than the cloak. Made into sport, he had named it. He had not called it clumsiness, delicacy, accident, nerves, old silk, or female embarrassment. He had named the cruelty without yet naming the culprit. Lady Priscilla's smile thinned. Naturally, Your Grace, yet propriety must be considered. I am considering it. A young lady in such a state cannot remain before company. Then company may look elsewhere. No one did. That was the terrible truth of society. It knew how to pretend not to see poverty, grief, loneliness, and unpaid kindness. It did not know how to look away from humiliation. Benedict extended his arm to Rosalind. Miss Fairbourne, allow me to escort you to the blue sitting room. My mother will send a maid, and whatever you require. Rosalind looked at his arm. Every rule she had learned crowded into that small space. A duke's arm. A public room. Her stepsisters watching. Lady Priscilla calculating. If she accepted, the gossip would bloom by dawn. If she refused, she would stand there until pity finished what cruelty had begun. She drew one slow breath and placed her gloved hand on his sleeve. The room changed again, not loudly, not visibly enough for anyone to admit, but the balance shifted. The woman who had been exposed as a joke was now being escorted by the highest-ranking man present. The path through the gallery opened before them. Benedict did not turn toward the nearest side door. He guided her down the center of the room, the way a guest of honor might be led to supper. Rosalind kept her chin lifted. The cloak brushed the floor behind her, because it was made for his height, not hers. She held it closed with one hand and rested the other on his arm. Her knees wanted to tremble. She refused them. They passed Lady Marchvale first. The older woman's eyes shone, but she did not weep. She inclined her head to Rosalind, not with pity, but with respect. That small bow nearly undid Rosalind more than the tearing of the gown had done. Then they passed Sybil and Lavinia. Sybil had recovered enough to curtsy. Lavinia followed a heartbeat too late. Benedict paused just long enough for both sisters to feel the pause become public. Miss Sybil. Miss Lavinia. His voice was formal and all the more devastating for it. You appear unsteady. I trust you will take care where you place your feet. Sybil's cheeks flooded with color. Lavinia's fingers crushed the lace of her fan. Rosalind did not look at them for more than a second. She did not trust herself to feel triumph. Not yet. Triumph required safety, and she had not reached safety. Lady Priscilla made one final attempt near the doorway. Rosalind is overcome, Your Grace. She has always been delicate in matters of attention. Rosalind felt Benedict's arm still beneath her hand. He looked down at her, not at Lady Priscilla. Are you overcome? It would have been easier to say yes, easier to be carried by his authority, wrapped in his cloak, spoken for until the room became someone else's problem. But some stubborn part of her, the part that had survived years of being useful without being valued, refused to surrender the only thing she still owned. Her voice was low but clear. No, Your Grace, I am embarrassed. I am not overcome. A faint breath moved through the room. Benedict's eyes held hers for one brief, unreadable moment. Then we shall proceed. They did. In the hall beyond the gallery, the air felt cooler. The music had not resumed behind them. That seemed to trouble Benedict. He glanced toward Mr. Vale, who had appeared without being summoned. The musicians will play again, Benedict said. Supper will be delayed by 10 minutes. No one leaves until I say otherwise. Yes, Your Grace. The torn gown is to be preserved exactly as it is. Have Mrs. Hensley attend Miss Fairbourne in the blue sitting room. Send for my mother. Rosalind turned toward him sharply. The gown? Yes, it is ruined. Ruined things often tell the truth more plainly than perfect ones. The words entered her before she could guard against them. She looked away, afraid that gratitude might show too openly. Your Grace, I do not wish to cause further disturbance. You did not cause this one. You can know what I saw." She looked back at him then. The hall had grown quieter. A maid waited near the blue sitting-room door, eyes lowered. Mr. Vale had gone to obey orders. Behind them, Wetherbourne's guests were trapped in the room with their own whispers. "What did you see?" Rosalind asked. Benedict's jaw tightened, enough to know this was not an accident. She felt the cloak suddenly heavier at her throat, not suffocating, anchoring. "If you say that aloud, they will say I encouraged you. They may say what they like. That is because you are a duke." He accepted the blow without flinching. Yes. Her honesty seemed to please him more than flattery had pleased any other man in the room. "And because I am a duke, I am accustomed to people lying very carefully in my presence. Your family is less careful than it believes." A sound almost escaped her. Not laughter, not tears, something caught between both. "You should not involve yourself. I already have." He glanced at the cloak around her shoulders. "And I do not lend my name to falsehood." The blue sitting-room door opened. Mrs. Hensley, the housekeeper, stood inside with a maid and a folded screen ready. Lady Marchvale appeared at the far end of the hall, moving with surprising speed for a woman who had earlier required Rosalind's arm. The Dowager Duchess followed, her face grave and unreadable. Rosalind began to remove the cloak. "I should return this." Benedict stopped her with only a raised hand. "Not yet, but it is yours. For the moment it is serving you better." The simplicity of it left her defenseless. She nodded once and entered the room. Before the door closed, Benedict looked past her to Mrs. Hensley. "No repairs until I have seen the gown again. Every torn edge remains as it is." "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Marchvale stepped inside after Rosalind, but the Dowager remained in the hall with her son. "Benedict," she said quietly, "London will make a story of this before midnight." He looked toward the closed door, then toward the gallery, where Sybil, Lavinia, and Lady Priscilla waited among witnesses. His expression turned colder than the marble beneath his feet. "Then we shall make certain it tells the right one." By breakfast the next morning, Rosalind had already become a story told by people who had not seen her face. The first gossip sheet arrived, folded beside Lady Priscilla's chocolate, its cheap paper smelling faintly of ink and rain. Lady Priscilla did not read it aloud at once. She let it sit beside her cup like a knife waiting to be noticed, while Sybil spread marmalade on toast with a hand that trembled only when Rosalind looked directly at it. Lavinia had slept poorly. That much showed in the soft shadows beneath her eyes, though not in any sign of remorse. Rosalind sat at the far end of the breakfast table in a plain morning gown borrowed from no memory and trimmed with nothing anyone could steal. The ivory gown remained at Wetherbourne House by the Duke's order. His cloak had been returned late the previous night, folded inside a cedar box and carried by a footman who would say nothing beyond the message that His Grace wished Miss Fairbourne to rest. Rest had not come. Shame had. It had stood at the foot of Rosalind's bed and whispered every possible version of what London might be saying. Lady Priscilla finally lifted the paper. Her mouth curved, not quite into a smile. How swiftly society writes when given ink enough. Sybil lowered her eyes. "Mamma, must we discuss it? We must discuss what has been made of us." Lady Priscilla smoothed the sheet. "A young lady of reduced consequence, dressed in sentimental silk, suffers a wardrobe. Calamity beneath the eyes of His Grace, the Duke of Wetherbourne, who responds with such gallantry that the room is left asking whether compassion or calculation stood nearest the candles." Lavinia gave a small gasp that was far too neat. They cannot mean Rosalind calculated it. Rosalind's fingers tightened around the handle of her teacup. The tea had gone cold. They can mean whatever they find useful. Lady Priscilla's gaze lifted. "Do not adopt that injured tone. You have done enough injury to this household already. I did not tear my own gown. No one has accused you of tearing it yourself. The paper comes very close. The paper records possibilities. That is what papers do when young women behave in ways that invite speculation." Rosalind looked at her stepmother across the length of polished mahogany. For years, that distance had been filled by commands, corrections, and quiet erasures. That morning it felt filled by something else. Not courage, not yet. The first hard shape of refusal. I behaved by standing still after I was humiliated. Sybil set down her knife. "Rosalind, please. You make it sound as though someone wished to harm you." Lavinia's eyes flicked down too quickly. Rosalind saw it. Lady Priscilla saw Rosalind see it. The older woman folded the gossip sheet with delicate care. "Your sisters had prospects last night. Real prospects. Connections that required patience, grace, and the absence of scandal. Instead, every tongue in London now connects the Fairbourne name to torn silk and a duke's cloak. Then perhaps London should ask why the silk tore. London will ask why you were so eager to be wrapped in His Grace's protection." The words struck with more force because they were spoken calmly. Rosalind stood. Her chair moved back with a faint scrape, loud in the breakfast room. "I was not eager." Lady Priscilla's eyes narrowed. "Sit down." No, the words surprised everyone, including Rosalind. It was not loud. It did not shake, that gave it strength. I was embarrassed. I was hurt. I was grateful because someone in that room chose not to laugh. I will not apologize for accepting a cloak when the alternative was standing exposed for the amusement of people who would have called cruelty entertainment. Sybil's face flushed. Lavinia looked toward the door as if wishing escape had been included among morning accomplishments. Lady Priscilla rose slowly. "You forget yourself." "No, ma'am," Rosalind said. "I remembered myself last night because no one else did." The silence that followed was not victory. Victory would have felt warmer. This felt like stepping onto thin ice and hearing it hold. A footman entered before Lady Priscilla could answer. He carried a silver salver with a sealed note. "For Lady Priscilla Fairbourne," he said, then added with visible discomfort, "delivered by hand." Lady Priscilla took it, broke the seal, and read. Her expression changed so swiftly that Rosalind knew the words had been chosen for the room, not merely for her. "How extraordinary," Lady Priscilla murmured. "It seems we are not the only household troubled by last night." Sybil leaned forward. "What is it?" Lady Priscilla held the paper where Rosalind could see enough to recognize the shape of the writing, her own hand or something near it. The loops were careful. The slant was nearly right, but there was a stiffness in the letters, as if the writer had copied rather than written. Lady Priscilla read aloud. "Your Grace, if I place myself near the gallery when the promenade begins, perhaps fortune will finally grant me the notice my family denies me. I shall trust that you understand a lady may be desperate without being dishonorable." Rosalind felt the blood leave her face. Lavinia whispered, "Rosalind." Sybil covered her mouth again, but this time her eyes were bright with more than performance. Lady Priscilla lowered the note. "It appears His Grace is not the only one who saw calculation last night. I did not write that. It resembles your hand. It is not mine. A convenient distinction." Rosalind reached for the paper, but Lady Priscilla drew it back. "You have no right to keep a forgery that bears my name, and you have no right to demand trust after last evening." The door opened again, this time before the footman could announce anyone properly. Lady Priscilla turned with irritation, then froze into respect. Mr. Vale, the Wetherbourne steward, stood at the threshold with a formal card upon a salver. Behind him waited a footman in ducal livery. "His Grace, the Duke of Wetherbourne, requests the honour of a morning call upon Miss Fairbourne and Lady Priscilla Fairbourne at noon," Mr. Vale said. "The Dowager Duchess sends assurance that the call shall be conducted with every propriety." Lady Priscilla took the card as if it might burn her. "At noon?" "Yes, my lady." Rosalind heard Sybil's breath catch. Benedict had not sent a secret message. He had not summoned her. He had not left her to gossip. He had chosen the most formal path available, the one that made his interest visible without making it improper. Lady Priscilla understood that as clearly as Rosalind did. By noon, the drawing room had been arranged like a battlefield, disguised as good breeding. Lady Priscilla sat beneath her late husband's portrait. Sybil and Lavinia occupied the sofa in gowns too soft for the tension in their faces. Rosalind stood near the window because sitting felt impossible. When Benedict entered, he brought his mother with him. The Dowager Duchess's presence cut off several possible accusations before anyone could speak them. Benedict bowed first to Lady Priscilla, then to Rosalind. His gaze paused only briefly on her face, but in that pause she felt the quiet question he was too well-bred to ask before witnesses. "Are you steady?" Rosalind answered by lifting her chin. Lady Priscilla opened with sorrow. "Your Grace, you find us distressed. A malicious note has appeared, and I fear my stepdaughter's judgment may have been misrepresented." "Misrepresented by whom?" Benedict asked. "That remains to be discovered. Then perhaps discovery should precede judgment." Lady Priscilla's smile tightened. She offered him the note. Benedict did not reach for it at once. "Miss Fairbourne." "Did you write this?" "No, Your Grace." "Do you know who did?" "No." "Do you wish me to believe you because you say it?" The question was severe enough to make Sybil look up hopefully. Rosalind met his eyes. "I wish you to believe what is true because truth can be proven. My word should begin the inquiry, not end it." Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps. Or respect. He took the note and read. "Desperate," he said after a moment. "Dishonorable. Notice. Fortune." "It is very dramatic," Lavinia murmured. "Rosalind has always read too much." Benedict looked at her. "Reading rarely damages spelling." Lavinia stilled. He held the page toward the light. "Miss Fairbourne spells receive correctly. I saw her note to Lady Marchvale last night, thanking her for the loan of a pin. This writer has written it incorrectly in the old-fashioned manner, twice, and corrected the second attempt poorly." Rosalind stared. She had not known he had seen that note. She had written it in the blue sitting room, with shaking hands, because Lady Marchvale had insisted that gratitude, like dignity, should not be delayed. Lady Priscilla's face remained composed, but a faint colour rose along her neck. A clever forger may make a deliberate error. A foolish one makes the same error from habit. Benedict folded the note once. "This does not prove who wrote it. It proves it should not be treated as Miss Fairbourne's confession." "Your Grace is generous," Lady Priscilla said. "No. I am cautious." He turned to Rosalind then, and the room seemed to draw back from them without moving. "What do you want, Miss Fairbourne?" The question found her as it had the night before, cutting through arrangements others had made around her life. She could have asked him to deny the gossip. She could have asked him to punish her sisters. She could have asked for his protection and watched Lady Priscilla choke on the consequence. But pity had already become another trap. "The truth," Rosalind said. "Not pity." The Dowager Duchess's eyes softened by the smallest degree. Benedict held Rosalind's gaze and nodded once. "Then we shall begin there." Before leaving, he asked to see the preserved gown at Wetherbourne House in her presence. Lady Priscilla objected on grounds of delicacy. The Dowager silenced that objection with one glance. As Benedict stepped into the hall, Mr. Vale approached with a small folded cloth from Mrs. Hensley, the housekeeper. Inside lay a loose thread from the torn seam and a note stating that one edge of the missing ribbon had not torn away. It had been cut clean. Benedict looked back toward the drawing room, where Rosalind stood alone beneath everyone's judgment. Then he looked down at the thread in his palm and understood that the piece missing from her mother's ribbon did not match the wound left on the gown. Someone had taken it. The gown lay upon a long table in the blue sitting room, like a wounded thing that had been taught to keep quiet. Afternoon light fell through the tall windows of Wetherbourne House, pale and exacting, revealing every pulled thread, every strained seam, every place where old ivory silk had been forced beyond what time alone would have done. Rosalind stood beside the table with her hands clasped so tightly her gloves had begun to crease. She had believed seeing the gown again would hurt less than standing in it while London watched. She had been wrong. Without her body inside it, the dress looked smaller, almost helpless, and that made the cruelty of its destruction sharper. Mrs. Hensley, the housekeeper, had placed clean linen beneath it and allowed no one to touch the fabric until His Grace arrived. Benedict came with the Dowager Duchess, Mr. Vale, and a maid carrying a small work-basket. Lady Marchvale had insisted upon attending as Rosalind's companion, declaring that an old woman who had caused half the difficulty by asking for it, Rosalind's arm should be permitted to help mend what society had torn. Benedict did not smile when he heard this. He only bowed to Lady Marchvale with grave approval, as if he valued plain speech more than grace. "Miss Fairbourne," he said, pausing at the table, "we need not do this today if it distresses you." Rosalind looked at the ruined bodice, at the narrow place where her mother's ribbon should have continued in an unbroken line. "It already distresses me, Your Grace." Delay would only give distress more time to grow. The Dowager's gaze moved to her with quiet respect. Benedict accepted the answer without protest. "Then we proceed carefully, Mrs." Hensley bent over the gown, not as a servant handling damaged clothing, but as a judge examining a witness too delicate to be pressed. "The silk is old, Your Grace, but not rotten." Miss Fairbourne had strengthened the lower seams neatly. The back gave way here because the fastening was pulled against the grain. She pointed with a blunt silver needle, careful not to pierce the cloth. "And here. This edge is not torn." Benedict leaned closer. "Cut? Yes, Your Grace. Not with large shears. Something smaller. Embroidery scissors, perhaps. Sharp enough to nick ribbon and thread, without cutting the main fabric until pressure was added." Rosalind felt Lady Marchvale's hand settle lightly at her elbow. Not to restrain her, to remind her she was not alone. The room seemed too quiet. Even the clock on the mantel sounded cautious. Benedict looked at Rosalind. "Did you cut any part of the ribbon while restoring the gown?" "No. I used what remained of my mother's trimming. I would not have wasted even an inch." Her voice held, but only because she made it. "The ribbon was whole when I dressed." Mrs. Hensley nodded. "That accords with what I see." The missing piece came away after the weakening was done. Mr. Vale stepped forward. "Your Grace, there is also the matter of the cloakroom." At that, the maid near the door lowered her eyes so swiftly that Rosalind noticed before anyone else did. She was young, with brown hair tucked beneath her cap and a face pale from the burden of a secret. Rosalind remembered her dimly from the evening before, passing near the gallery with a tray of fresh candles. Benedict saw Rosalind's attention shift and followed it. "You have something to say," he said, not unkindly. The maid's hands tightened around the workbasket. "I don't want to make trouble, Your Grace. Trouble has already been made. Truth will not be blamed for arriving late." The maid swallowed. "I saw Miss Lavinia near the cloakroom before the promenade. She was where the ladies had left shawls and wraps. I thought perhaps she had mislaid something." She had a little pair of scissors in her hand. Mrs. Hensley turned sharply, but Benedict lifted a hand and she held her tongue. "Did she see you?" he asked. "I don't think so, Your Grace. But Miss Sybil came after, and they spoke in whispers. I could not hear all of it. Only Miss Sybil saying old silk would do the rest." Rosalind closed her eyes for 1 second. She had suspected. Hearing suspicion given a voice was different. It made the world feel colder because it became less confusing. Cruelty, once named, lost its mist and gained a shape. "What is your name?" Rosalind asked. The maid looked startled to be addressed by her. "Annie Vale, miss." Mr. Vale's expression tightened. Benedict noticed. "Your relation?" "My brother's girl, Your Grace. Taken on below stairs this season." Annie looked near tears. "Please, miss, I shouldn't have said. Lady Priscilla knows my aunt in service at the Fairbourne House. If I'm named, they'll send word. I'll lose my place, and my aunt will bear it too." Before Benedict could answer, Rosalind spoke. "Then she must not be named yet." He turned to her. "Miss Fairbourne?" No, the word came softly, but it was firmer than she expected. "Your Grace, I want the truth, I do. But I will not purchase it with the ruin of a maid who has less protection than I do. If Annie speaks, it must be when she can be shielded from what follows." Annie's eyes widened. Lady Marchvale made a small approving sound. The Dowager Duchess looked at Rosalind, as though a new piece of a puzzle had slid into place. Benedict's expression changed too, but more slowly. The anger remained. Under it, something warmer stirred and was carefully controlled. "You defend her when she has evidence that might defend you," he said. "She did not tear my gown." "No, then she should not pay first." For a moment no one spoke. Then Benedict turned to Annie. "You will not be named today, Mrs. Hensley. See that Annie's duties keep her within Wetherbourne House until I decide otherwise, Mr. Vale. No servant from the Fairbourne household is to speak with mine without your knowledge." "Yes, your grace," Mr. Vale said. Annie looked at Rosalind with such gratitude that Rosalind had to look down at the gown again. Gratitude was dangerous when one was already trying not to break. Benedict returned to the table. "We have the cut ribbon, the weakened fastening, the witness and the forged note." "Not proof enough," Rosalind said. "Not for London. London has condemned people with less. That is why I want more." His eyes met hers. "So do I." The words should have been simple. They were not. They placed him beside her, not above her, and Rosalind felt the difference with an ache she could not name. "Mrs. Hensley continued her examination and found one more thread of darker silk caught near the torn fastening, a blue fibre that might have come from Sybil's gown. It was too small to accuse with, but too suggestive to ignore. The dowager ordered it folded into paper. Lady Marchvale said nothing, which meant she was thinking more than anyone in the room. When the gown had yielded all it could without being handled further, Benedict gave instructions for it to remain locked in the blue sitting room. Rosalind moved toward the window, while the others spoke quietly behind her. Outside, Mayfair rolled on in carriages and calls, as if no one's life had been altered by a ribbon, a lie, and a roomful of witnesses. She touched the place at her shoulder where the pin had scratched her. It was covered now by muslin and proper sleeves invisible to everyone. That was how most injuries survived in society. Covered. Explained away. Made inconvenient to mention. Benedict came to stand a few feet beside her, leaving enough distance for propriety, and enough nearness for sincerity. "I dislike seeing you afraid," he said. She watched a carriage turn at the corner. "Fear is not defeat." "No," his voice lowered. "But it is still an offense when others have taught it to you." She turned then, despite herself. "You speak as if you know something about being taught." A shadow passed behind his eyes. It was gone almost before she saw it. "Everyone in my position is taught something. Not all lessons are useful." Lady Marchvale called Rosalind back before she could ask more. The examination was over. Mrs. Hensley brought a folded bundle from a chair near the hearth. Benedict's cloak. Cleaned, brushed, and returned to its dark severity, except for one small place inside the lining where Mrs. Hensley had left a faint mark unaltered. "The blood from the scratch, Your Grace," the housekeeper said. "It nearly vanished with treatment, but I did not remove it entirely without permission." Rosalind's face warmed. Benedict did not look embarrassed. He looked thoughtful. "Leave it for now." Then he lifted the cloak and held it toward Rosalind. "Take it. Your Grace, I cannot. Not as a gift. As a loan." "For what purpose?" "Safety may be borrowed until justice is permanent." She stared at him. There were men who could make a woman feel indebted by offering a chair. Benedict Ainsley had just offered her the symbol of the worst and strangest hour of her life. And somehow he had made it sound like a door she could choose to open or not. Rosalind accepted the cloak with both hands. "Then I will return it when justice is no longer temporary. I shall hold you to that." Before anything more could pass between them, Mr. Vale entered again, his controlled face carrying news. "Your Grace, there is a message from the Fairbourne House. Lady Priscilla requests Miss Fairbourne's immediate return. She says a family matter has been discovered." Rosalind's fingers tightened on the cloak. "What family matter?" Mr. Vale hesitated. The messenger would not say Miss, but Mrs. Hensley's girl, sent earlier to return Lady Marchvale's fan, reports seeing Lady Priscilla with a packet of old papers. It was tied with what looked like ivory ribbon. The room went still. Rosalind felt the floor beneath her feet and the cloak in her hands and the thin, bright pull of memory. Her mother's ribbon, Lady Priscilla's reticule, a hidden packet. Benedict spoke first, his voice colder than the glass in the windows. "Miss Fairbourne will not return alone." Rosalind lifted her chin. "No, Your Grace. But I will return." He looked at her, and this time he did not try to stop her. "Then we shall go carefully." She nodded once. For the first time since the gown had torn, the fear inside her had shape, direction, and purpose. It was no longer only something done to her. It was something she could follow. Rosalind returned to the Fairbourne house in Benedict's carriage, with Lady Marchvale seated beside her, and the Duke riding opposite in a silence that did not press. That silence was a kind of discipline. He did not question her before she was ready, did not fill the small space with promises, and did not turn protection into command. The cloak lay folded across Rosalind's lap, dark against her plain muslin gown, while the city moved past the windows in grey afternoon light. Mayfair looked unchanged. Doors opened, footmen waited. Ladies stepped down from carriages, with folded notes in gloved hands. Yet Rosalind felt as though some invisible seam in her life had been cut, and everything once held in place by obedience had begun to loosen. At the Fairbourne house, Lady Priscilla had arranged the drawing-room, as if receiving judgment rather than family. Sybil sat near the hearth with embroidery she did not touch. Lavinia stood by the mantel, pale but defiant. On the small table between the sofas rested a packet of papers tied with a narrow strip of ivory ribbon. Rosalind knew that ribbon before she reached it. She had stitched it by candlelight. She had touched it in the carriage. She had watched a piece of it vanish from the gallery floor. Lady Priscilla rose when Benedict entered, because even anger remembered rank. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying with careful control. "This is an unexpected honor." Benedict bowed. Unexpectedness seems to have become a Fairbourne habit. Lady Marchvale made a sound that might have been a cough. Lady Priscilla's mouth tightened. "I asked Rosalind to return for a private family matter." "Then it is fortunate she brought witnesses," Lady Marchvale said. "Private family matters have a way of becoming public when mishandled." Rosalind stepped toward the table. "Why is my mother's ribbon tied around those papers?" "Because sentimental objects are sometimes found in sentimental places," Lady Priscilla replied. "You have always made relics of scraps. That is not an answer." Sybil's needle pricked the fabric in her lap. Lavinia looked toward her mother. Lady Priscilla gave neither daughter permission to speak. "The packet was discovered among old effects in the attic," she said. "I thought it best to examine it before alarming you." Rosalind reached for it. Lady Priscilla placed her hand over the papers first. "Careful, child. Not every discovery is a gift." Benedict's voice cut through the room. "Remove your hand." Lady Priscilla froze. "Your Grace, you cannot mean to involve yourself in the handling of another family's papers." "I am involving myself in the handling of a lady who has been publicly injured beneath my roof, falsely represented by a forged note, and now denied access to documents tied with evidence." Missing from her gown. His expression did not alter. "Remove your hand." She did. Rosalind untied the ribbon. Her fingers shook only once, and she hated that everyone saw it. Inside lay several folded letters, an inventory written in an old solicitor's hand, and a smaller sealed paper bearing her mother's name. Rosalind opened the inventory first, because grief would have made the letter too dangerous. The words seemed ordinary at first. Her mother's jewels. 2 small annuities. A sum placed in trust for Miss Rosalind Fairbourne's presentation and marriage. A dowry modest by ducal measure, but respectable for the daughter of a baronet. Enough for gowns, enough for a season. Enough to keep her from entering every room as someone barely tolerated. The paper blurred. She blinked it clear. "This says my mother left money for me." Lady Priscilla folded her hands. A small provision, entirely insufficient to make much difference. Rosalind looked up slowly. "Where is it?" Sybil dropped her embroidery frame. The crack of wood against carpet was soft, but everyone heard it. Lady Priscilla's calm hardened. "Households are expensive after a death. Your father left obligations." There were repairs, debts, appearances to maintain. "My presentation was never paid for," Rosalind said. "My gowns were never ordered." "I was told there was nothing." There was little, but not nothing. Lavinia whispered, "Mama!" Lady Priscilla silenced her with a glance. Benedict did not move. That was the most frightening thing about him in anger. He did not thunder. He became still enough to make others hear their own guilt. Rosalind lifted the old inventory. Sybil's blue silk. Lavinia's rose gown, the modiste bills, their season. Lady Priscilla's eyes flashed. Your sisters had prospects. Prospects require investment. A family must choose where a limited sum can do the most good. You chose to spend my mother's gift on the girls who mocked me for wearing what little she left. The room fell silent. Not even Lady Priscilla had an immediate reply. Then she found one, because women like her did not survive by lacking weapons. You speak of mockery while a duke stands beside you, ready to believe any tale that flatters your injury. How convenient this all is. A torn gown, a gallant cloak, a discovered dowry. If one were less charitable, one might think you have learned how profitable humiliation can be. Benedict stepped forward. Rosalind lifted one hand without looking at him. He stopped. The small obedience in that powerful body nearly broke her composure. She faced Lady Priscilla herself. You may call me foolish. You may call me plain. You may say I was no use except where I could mend what others tore, but do not call me greedy because I have discovered I was robbed. Sybil stood. No one robbed you. Mama did what she had to do. Did she? Rosalind turned to her. Then why was the packet hidden? Why was the ribbon cut from my gown? Why was a forged note written in my name? Sybil's face changed. Just a little enough. Lady Priscilla saw the danger and moved quickly. This discussion is ended. I shall ask our solicitor to review the matter when appropriate. Benedict's voice was cold. Your solicitor will not be the only one to review it. Lady Priscilla looked at him with sudden calculation. Then her expression softened into wounded dignity. As your grace wishes. I only hope London will be as willing to hear sober fact as it is to indulge a young lady's dramatic version of neglect. By the next afternoon, Rosalind understood what that meant. Lady Marchvale's luncheon had been planned before the rout, and refusing to attend would have looked like guilt. Rosalind came in a grey gown with the smallest possible trim, accompanied by Lady Marchvale, and watched by half the matrons who shaped reputations before supper. Benedict was not present. That made the room bolder. It began politely. Soup, fish, a discussion of a soprano's poor Italian, then Mrs. Alderwick, a widow with a voice like polished bone, set down her glass and said, My dear Miss Fairbourne, we were so distressed to hear of your difficulties. First the unfortunate gown, then whispers of a missing dowry. One scarcely knows what to believe. Every fork seemed to pause. Rosalind felt Lady Marchvale turn slightly beside her. Rescue stood one breath away. Rosalind did not take it. Then one should believe slowly, ma'am. Mrs. Alderwick smiled. How sensible. Though some say the claim appeared only after his grace showed concern. Some people discover courage only after someone has finally noticed their wound. The words left Rosalind before fear could stop them. A faint rustle went around the table. Mrs. Alderwick's smile thinned. And did his grace's concern encourage this courage? Rosalind placed her hands in her lap, beneath the table where no one could see them tremble. His grace gave me a cloak when others gave me their eyes. That is all London knows. It is not all that happened. Then what did happen? Sybil asked from 3 seats away. Rosalind had not known her stepsister would attend. Of course she had. Lady Priscilla's work was never done with one hand. Sybil's face was pale and perfect. We are all eager to understand why you have chosen to accuse your family so publicly. Rosalind looked at her. I did not choose the public nature of my humiliation. You chose to preserve it. No, His Grace preserved the gown, and you accepted. Yes. The answer surprised the table by being simple. Rosalind lifted her chin. I accepted protection when I needed it. I accepted inquiry when truth required it. I will not accept the suggestion that needing help makes me dishonest, Mrs. Alderwick said. Yet there is a note. Lady Marchvale's fingers tightened near her spoon. Rosalind turned back to the widow. A forged note. You are certain? Yes. Many young ladies are certain. Until consequences arrive. Before Rosalind could answer, the doors opened and a footman entered with a card for Lady Marchvale. The old woman read it, and for the first time that afternoon her smile was not kind. How timely. His Grace requests that Miss Fairbourne be informed he has compared the paper, seal, and ink of the forged note with materials missing from Wetherbourne House. Sybil went very still. Mrs. Alderwick's expression sharpened with interest. Lady Marchvale continued. He further states that no conclusion is yet final, but Miss Fairbourne is not to be treated as the author of a document whose errors are already under question. The words moved around the table like a match carried near dry silk. Rosalind looked at Sybil and saw the faintest fracture in her composure. Not proof, not confession, but fear. That fear steadied Rosalind more than comfort could have done. She sat among women prepared to dissect her reputation and did not lower her eyes. Benedict had nearly declared her respectable by his authority. She had stopped him. Now his authority had done something better. It had made room for her truth to breathe. Lady Marchvale folded the card. Well, she said, lifting her spoon again, I believe the soup is growing cold, but no one cared for the soup anymore. By evening, half of Mayfair knew that Miss Rosalind Fairbourne had claimed a stolen dowry, denied a forged letter, and sat through Lady Marchvale's luncheon without weeping. By midnight, the other half had decided she was either the boldest schemer of the season or the first honest woman in a room full of liars, and in Wetherbourne House, Benedict Ainsley stood alone in his study with the forged note before him, realizing that if he tried to save Rosalind by choosing for her, he would be no better than the world that had spent years deciding what she was allowed to be. Benedict did not sleep after the luncheon. He read the forged note again beneath the study lamps until its false loops seemed to crawl across the paper like insects. He compared it to the note Rosalind had written to Lady Marchvale, to the list Mrs. Hensley had made of damaged seams, to a page from his own writing desk where the seal wafer had gone missing. Each piece told him a portion of the truth. None of them solved the greater danger. London did not require certainty to ruin a woman. It only required entertainment, and Rosalind Fairbourne had been made entertaining against her will. By morning, he knew what duty demanded. By noon, when Rosalind arrived at Wetherbourne House with Lady Marchvale as companion, he discovered that duty was the very word that would betray him. She entered the blue sitting room in a grey gown, her face composed, and her eyes shadowed by exhaustion she had not allowed anyone to name. Benedict noticed the careful way she held herself, as if every movement must be measured in advance to deny the world another scene. He wanted to remove her from every whisper in Mayfair. He wanted to place the full weight of Wetherbourne between her and the people who had enjoyed her humiliation. That desire was so powerful that it arrived in his mouth before tenderness could soften it. Miss Fairbourne, he said, after Lady Marchvale had taken a chair near the window and the Dowager Duchess had settled beside the hearth, there is one clear way to end speculation. Rosalind looked at him. Truth? He heard the warning in the single word and did not heed it quickly enough. Truth will take time. Reputation may not grant it. If I make a formal offer, no one will dare speak of you, as if you had arranged anything dishonorable. Your position would be secured. Your future would be protected. Your stepmother's influence would end. Lady Marchvale closed her eyes briefly, as if watching a horse approach a wall too fast. The dowager became very still. Rosalind did not blush. She did not smile. She did not look grateful. The absence of those expected things struck Benedict harder than anger. A formal offer, she said. Yes, because it is efficient. He stopped. Because it is right. Right for whom, Your Grace? The room tightened around the answer. Rosalind's hands folded once, then unfolded. That is the difficulty. Benedict felt the first edge of his mistake, but pride and fear made poor advisers. Miss Fairbourne, I am not speaking lightly. I would not offer marriage as a gesture. No, you would offer it as shelter. Is shelter an insult? Not when rain is falling. It becomes one when a woman is asked to live forever beneath a roof she did not choose. He drew back a fraction. You believe I would trap you. I believe you would protect me so thoroughly that no one would hear me again. Not even you." The words were quiet. That made them unforgiving. Lady Marchvale shifted in her chair but did not intervene. The dowager watched her son with the sharp grief of a mother who sees a lesson arriving too late to prevent pain. Benedict looked at Rosalind, and for one foolish moment all he could see was the gown tearing, her face burning, the room waiting to laugh. "You would rather stand exposed to scandal? I would rather stand ruined than be rescued wrongly." Silence followed. It was not the stunned silence of the gallery. It was smaller and more private, and therefore more difficult to endure. Benedict realized then what he had done. He had taken her own words from the luncheon, the words he had admired, and tried to build a cage from them. He had mistaken his power for an answer. Rosalind rose. "I am grateful for what you have done. I will always be grateful for what you did that night. But gratitude is not consent, and safety is not the same as being chosen." He bowed his head, not deeply, but enough for the apology to begin before he spoke. "You are right. That startled her. I did not expect you to say that. I did not expect to deserve it." A faint movement passed across her mouth. Not amusement, not forgiveness, a small recognition of honesty. "There is something I must do," she said. "Alone, not alone, but not as your rescue. Tell me." Sybil and Lavinia's gowns were altered by Madame Celeste in Bruton Street. If ivory trimming was cut or matched or removed, someone in that shop may have recorded it. "My stepmother keeps accounts only when accounts benefit her. Modistas keep them because they must be paid." Benedict looked at the dowager. She gave the smallest nod. Lady Marchvale said, "A sensible plan," which means dangerous people will resent it. Rosalind turned back to Benedict. "I will go with Lady Marchvale. A footman may follow if propriety requires it. You may not storm into the shop and frighten the woman into silence." He accepted the rebuke because he had earned it. "I will not interfere unless needed. And who decides need? You do." The answer altered the air between them. Rosalind studied him, searching for command hidden beneath obedience. Finding none, she inclined her head. "Then we may proceed." Bruton Street smelled of damp stone, horse leather, and expensive perfume leaking from shop doors. Madame Celeste's establishment sat behind a discreet green front with lace curtains arranged to reveal nothing and imply everything. Rosalind entered with Lady Marchvale. Benedict remained outside in the carriage for the first 10 minutes, as promised, with his footman James stationed near the corner and his own impatience held like a reins-tight horse. Through the shop window he saw only shadows moving between bolts of fabric. He told himself that standing aside was not inaction. He told himself twice. Inside, Madame Celeste greeted Lady Marchvale with professional delight, and Rosalind, with the cautious assessment of a woman who read scandal before morning papers, reached breakfast trays. "Miss Fairbourne," she said, "I had heard your gown suffered an accident." "It suffered intention," Rosalind replied. Madame's brows rose. Lady Marchvale removed her gloves slowly. "We have come about 2 gowns ordered for Miss Sybil and Miss Lavinia Fairbourne, blue silk and rose silk, altered shortly before the Wetherbourne rout." "I cannot speak of a patron's account." "Then speak of ribbon," Rosalind said. "Ivory trimming, narrow old, not new from your stock." "Was anyone paid to remove or match such trimming?" Madame Celeste's face changed by a thread. It was enough. She turned to a younger assistant near the back table. "Mina, bring the alteration ledger." "Madame," the assistant whispered. "Now." The ledger was heavy, bound in brown leather, and smelled of dust and starch. Madame turned several pages, each marked with names, fabrics, deposits, and balances due. Rosalind stood very straight, while her own family's expenditures passed beneath Madame's finger. Blue silk overdress, rose satin flounce, pearl edging, rush charge. Then, on a narrower line squeezed beneath Sybil's account, came the words that made the room sharpen around her. Ivory trim removal, special handling, paid in cash. Rosalind stared at the ink until it became both answer and wound. "May I see the date?" "The morning before the rout," Madame said reluctantly. Lady Marchvale leaned closer. Who ordered it? Madame pressed her lips together. The account is under Miss Sybil Fairbourne. That is not an answer, Lady Marchvale said. Madame looked toward the curtained door, as if fearing listeners among the silks. A young lady came with a sample, golden hair, blue pelisse. She said the trim belonged to an old gown in the household and must be loosened without obvious damage, as a jest for sisters. I refused at first. She laughed and said her mother had approved. I agreed to remove a portion from a practice strip she provided, not to damage any gown. I did not know it would be used cruelly. Rosalind felt heat rise behind her eyes. She did not let it become tears. Did she leave the sample? Madame hesitated, then opened a small drawer beneath the counter. From it she took a twist of paper. Inside lay 3 pale threads and a sliver of ivory ribbon, no longer than the first joint of Rosalind's thumb. I kept it because old ribbon is difficult to match, and because the young lady frightened my apprentice. Lady Marchvale's voice softened. Madame, you understand this matters. I understand it. Matters to my business as well. It matters to a woman they tried to ruin. Madame looked at Rosalind then, and something human overcame caution. Then take it. I will say what is written here if asked before proper witnesses. But I beg you, do not make my shop the subject of gossip. Rosalind folded the paper carefully. I do not wish to ruin anyone who tells the truth. When she stepped outside, Benedict was already out of the carriage, though he had not approached the door. He saw the paper in her hand and the effort in her face. His first instinct moved him forward. His promise stopped him after one step. Rosalind saw both movements. The ledger confirms it, she said. Sybil's account for ivory trim removal. Benedict's jaw tightened. Then we confront them. No, Miss Fairbourne, no, she repeated, and this time the word did not tremble. We gather enough that they cannot laugh, cry, or faint their way out of it. Today I found proof. I will not waste it by spending it too early. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bowed slightly. You again? I am learning. That almost broke through her exhaustion. A real smile came near enough to be felt, though not quite seen. Then learn this too. I do not need you ahead of me. He stepped aside, leaving the pavement clear beside him. No, his voice was low. You need me beside you, if you need me at all. Rosalind looked at the space he had made. Then she walked into it. For 3 blocks, they moved together behind Lady Marchvale's slower pace, with James several yards back and London pretending not to watch. Benedict did not touch her. He did not speak for her. Yet his presence at her side made every passerby think twice before staring too long. Near the corner, hidden partly by a milliner's striped awning, a Fairbourne maid who had been sent on an errand saw them emerge from Madame Celeste's shop. By dusk, Sybil knew. She stood in Rosalind's empty bedchamber, with the door locked, the colour gone from her cheeks, while Lavinia twisted a handkerchief into a rope between her fingers. Madame Celeste will talk, Lavinia whispered. So will the maid. Sybil turned from the window. Fear had made her prettier in a cruel, brittle way. Then we stopped discussing ribbons and ledgers. How? Sybil's eyes hardened. If Rosalind cannot be kept ruined, the Duke must be tainted with her. Lady Marchvale's King Street assembly began with music polished enough to disguise malice and candles bright enough to make every false smile look almost holy. Rosalind entered on Lady Marchvale's arm, dressed in pale grey again, because she had discovered there was strength in refusing decoration when others expected apology. The room was smaller than Wetherbourne's gallery, but more dangerous, for it held the kind of guests who did not need a crowd to destroy a name. The women present shaped invitations. The men present repeated what their wives allowed them to believe. A rumour born here could reach every breakfast table in Mayfair before the first pot of chocolate cooled. Benedict arrived 10 minutes later with the Dowager Duchess, and Rosalind knew at once that he had chosen the timing carefully. He had not escorted her in, which would have fed one kind of gossip. He had not stayed away, which would have fed another. He bowed to Lady Marchvale, greeted 3 matrons with chilly courtesy, and took his place near the mantel, where he could see the whole room without appearing to watch only her. That restraint steadied her more than any public claim could have done. It said he remembered. Beside her, Lady Marchvale murmured, "Do not fear the room, child. Rooms are only dangerous because people think walls can agree with them." Rosalind almost smiled. "Then I shall try not to be outvoted by wallpaper." "Good. Wit is better than trembling." Across the room, Sybil stood in blue once more, though tonight the colour seemed less triumphant. Lavinia wore white muslin with rose ribbons, and the fixed innocence of a girl who had practiced innocence before a mirror. Lady Priscilla moved among guests as though wronged motherhood had dressed her for the evening. She received condolences with lowered eyes. She gave little sighs when Rosalind's name was mentioned. She never spoke loudly enough to be vulgar. That was her talent. Cruelty, in Lady Priscilla's hands, always wore gloves. For half an hour nothing happened, and that was worse than a direct attack. Rosalind felt the room gathering itself. She answered questions about music, thanked Lady Marchvale's niece for a cup of lemonade, and accepted Lady Alderwick's comment about unfortunate publicity, with a composure that cost more than anyone saw. Benedict spoke with an elderly earl near the hearth, but when Rosalind glanced his way, she found his attention on Lady Priscilla's reticule. It was the same black reticule from Wetherbourne House, clasped too tightly, guarded too carefully. Then Sybil moved. She crossed to Lady Marchvale's card table, where a group of matrons had collected beneath the pretense of discussing whist. Lavinia followed, carrying a folded paper in both hands. Lady Priscilla allowed them a moment, then stepped forward as if reluctantly drawn by duty. "Lady Marchvale," she said, her voice trembling just enough to invite listeners. "I had hoped to spare your drawing room any further discomfort, but matters have reached a point at which silence may be mistaken for consent." Lady Marchvale set down her fan. "Silence is frequently mistaken for many things, Lady Priscilla. Wisdom is only one of them." Several guests went very still. Rosalind remained where she was. Running would finish the scene before it began. Benedict did not move from the mantel, but his head turned slightly. Sybil unfolded the paper in Lavinia's hands. "We did not wish to speak," she said. "Rosalind is our sister, whatever she thinks of us now. But after accusations regarding Mamma the gown, and even money left years ago, we must ask whether her own conduct has been entirely innocent." Rosalind looked at the paper and felt the old chill of the forged note return. "Another letter." Lady Priscilla's expression sharpened at the word another. Lavinia lifted her chin. "The same one, but people keep dismissing it, because His Grace prefers to do so." Benedict's eyes cooled. That was all. It was enough to make Lavinia's voice falter before she forced it onward. "It proves Rosalind hoped to meet him privately before the promenade. It proves she wanted his attention." "Does it?" Lady Marchvale asked. Sybil turned to Rosalind with sorrow shaped for an audience. "Rosalind, if you were lonely, you could have told us. You didn't need to make yourself a spectacle." The words struck, but not as Sybil intended. Loneliness was too true to be an accusation. Rosalind had been lonely for years in rooms full of family. She had mended gowns, soothed tempers, remembered birthdays, and gone to bed without anyone asking whether she had been tired. But loneliness had not made her dishonest. It had made her observant. "Read it," Rosalind said. Sybil blinked. "I beg your pardon. If you brought it before these ladies, read it fully. Do not wave it like a mourning handkerchief, and hope implication will do the rest." A murmur moved around the room. Lady Priscilla's eyes narrowed. Lavinia's hands tightened on the paper. Lady Marchvale leaned back, and Rosalind felt the older woman's approval like a warm coal held under ash. Sybil began to read. Her voice was soft, wounded, and careful. "Your Grace, if I place myself near the gallery when the promenade begins, perhaps fortune will finally grant me the notice my family denies me. I shall trust that you understand a lady may be desperate without being dishonorable." She lowered the paper. "There. Must we endure more?" "Yes," Rosalind said. "Read the direction. That is unnecessary." "Then I shall." Rosalind stepped forward, but Benedict's voice reached them first. "Give Miss Fairbourne the letter. Sybil looked to Lady Priscilla. The room saw it. That was the first mistake. Lady Priscilla gave a small nod. Lavinia carried the letter to Rosalind as if handing a blade to someone who did not know which edge was sharp. Rosalind accepted it. The page trembled only slightly. She looked first at the script, then at the fold, then at the red mark near the edge where a seal had been pressed and broken. Her breath slowed. She did not fully understand why the mark mattered, but something in Benedict's expression told her he did. "It is addressed to His Grace," she said. "Not delivered through the post." "Obviously," Sybil replied. "Such a note would be hidden." "Then, who found it?" Lavinia opened her mouth and closed it again. Lady Priscilla answered smoothly. "It was placed among effects returned from Wetherbourne House." "By whom?" Rosalind asked. "A servant, naturally." "Which servant? Must you interrogate every practical detail to avoid the moral one?" Lady Priscilla asked. Rosalind felt the room lean toward that sentence. It was a skillful one. Make truth sound petty. Make accuracy look like evasion. She turned to Benedict, not for rescue, but because the seal belonged to him. He came forward at last. The room shifted for him, parting because rank had its own gravity. He took the letter only after Rosalind offered it. That mattered. He did not remove it from her hand like evidence from a child. He accepted it as one partner taking weight from another. "This seal," he said, holding the page toward the candlelight, "is mine." Lady Priscilla's eyes flickered. A bold confession from the letter itself. No, a complication for the forgery. Benedict's tone remained flat. "This impression came from a desk seal kept in my private writing room. It is not used for ordinary correspondence. It was missing from its drawer the morning after the Wetherbourne rout, and returned before noon by someone who thought absence would go unnoticed." Lavinia's face lost color. Sybil recovered faster. "Perhaps Rosalind took it. Miss Fairbourne has never entered my writing room." "How can your Grace know that?" Lady Priscilla asked. Benedict looked at her. "Because my servants are competent." The answer landed like a door closing. Lady Alderwick, who had clearly expected entertainment, now looked as if she had found something better. "Then someone else must have taken it." "Yes," Benedict said. "Someone with reason to make a false note appear more convincing." Sybil gave a delicate laugh. "This is absurd. We are being accused because Rosalind has wept prettily enough to win ducal sympathy." Rosalind did not weep. She did not even lower her eyes. "I have not wept in any room where you could benefit from it." The words escaped before caution could soften them. The silence afterward was immediate. Sybil flushed so fiercely that powder could not hide it. Lavinia whispered, "You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I am saying." Rosalind looked from one stepsister to the other. "If I wrote that letter, why does it contain a spelling error I do not make? If I planned the gown, why was the ribbon cut before I entered the gallery? If I sought His Grace's private attention, why did I ask for Lady Marchvale to attend every call afterward?" Lady Priscilla's voice lowered. "A clever woman creates witnesses." Benedict's eyes turned toward her. "So does a guilty one." The Dowager Duchess stepped forward then, silver silk whispering against the carpet. "This discussion has become sufficiently serious that I advise care. My son does not make accusations for sport. Neither do I. If a member of this room forged a letter with a Wetherbourne seal, she has not merely injured Miss Fairbourne. She has presumed upon this house. That changed the room more than Rosalind's suffering had done. Her ruined gown had been a scandal. A stolen ducal seal was an offense against rank. Rosalind felt the bitter lesson and did not mistake it. Society would defend a duke's wax faster than a woman's dignity. Benedict seemed to understand the thought as it crossed her face, because his voice altered when he spoke again. "The seal matters because it proves access. Miss Fairbourne matters because she was the target." She looked at him. He looked back. For one steady second, the room vanished behind the simple fact of being understood. Then a small voice broke from near the door. "Your Grace," everyone turned. Annie Vale stood half inside the assembly room, pale beneath her cap with Mr. Vale behind her and Lady Marchvale's butler looking scandalized by the invasion of service into society. Annie twisted her hands once, then forced them still. "I beg pardon, my lady." "I know I shouldn't speak here." Lady Priscilla went white with fury. "This is outrageous." Benedict did not look away from Annie. "Speak." Annie swallowed. "I saw Miss Lavinia near your Grace's writing desk after the rout. She had no candle of her own, and she startled when I came in with fresh ones. I didn't know what she had taken then." Lavinia made a sound like air, leaving a cracked glass. Sybil stepped toward her, too late. Annie's voice shook, but it did not fail. "I know now." The room did not breathe after Annie spoke. Even the candles seemed to burn more narrowly, each flame caught in the strange stillness that follows truth, when truth has entered through the wrong door. Lady Marchvale's assembly, which had been built for cards, music, and the polite handling of reputations, now held a maid in a plain cap, a pale young lady accused of theft, a forged letter, and the Duke of Wetherbourne standing with the sort of quiet authority that made every witness aware of his own posture. Lavinia stared at Annie as if the girl had stepped out of a wall. "She's lying," she said, but the denial came too quickly and too thin. "I don't even know her." Annie's hands twisted once before she forced them flat against her skirt. "You saw me, miss." "You looked right at me when I came in with the candles." "I looked at a servant." "That doesn't mean I knew who you were." Sybil moved closer to Lavinia, her fan trembling in a way she could no longer disguise. "Your Grace, surely you cannot allow a girl from below stair to accuse a gentleman's daughter in open company." Benedict's gaze did not leave Annie. "A gentleman's daughter may be accused by anyone who saw her do what she should not have done." Lady Priscilla drew herself upward, gathering insult around her like a shawl. "This is intolerable. Lady Marchvale, I must protest. My daughters have been subjected to vulgar implication, and now a servant is permitted to make claims in a room of quality." Lady Marchvale looked at Annie, then at Lady Priscilla. "Quality is proving itself difficult to locate tonight. We shall use honesty until it returns." A murmur passed among the guests, soft but eager. Rosalind heard it and disliked it. They were listening now, not because Annie was afraid, not because a powerless girl might lose her position for speaking, but because the scandal had widened enough to include rank. Rosalind stepped forward before Benedict could answer for her, before Lady Priscilla could turn Annie into another tool. "Annie did not come here to entertain anyone," she said. The room turned toward her. That still frightened her, but the fear no longer ruled her. She came because she saw something and feared silence would do more harm than speech. Lady Priscilla laughed once, quietly. "How noble you sound, Rosalind. One might almost forget that your entire position depends upon convincing these people you are a victim." Rosalind felt the blow, but she had learned by now that some blows lost their force when answered plainly. "My position has depended upon other people's convenience for many years. I am trying to change that." Annie's eyes filled with tears, though none fell. "Miss Fairbourne, I didn't mean to cause trouble for you. You are not the cause of trouble," Rosalind said. "You are the person brave enough to name it." Benedict looked at her then, and the expression in his eyes was not surprise. It was something deeper, more dangerous to her composure. Respect had warmed into admiration, and admiration had begun to approach a word neither of them could safely speak in that room. He turned to Mr. Vale. "Annie Vale is under my protection from this moment." Annie's face went white. "Your Grace? You will not return to any household where Lady Priscilla's influence may threaten your place. Mrs. Hensley will assign you duties at Wetherbourne House until arrangements are complete. If you prefer service outside London, there will be a secure post for you at Larkmere Park, with a written reference under my seal." Mr. Vale bowed his head, his usual composure strained by gratitude. "Your Grace is generous." "No," Benedict said. "Late." Rosalind understood the single word. He meant he should have protected Annie sooner. He meant power was most honorable when it arrived before damage, not after. Lady Priscilla's eyes hardened. How admirable. His Grace collects distressed females now, A ruined stepdaughter, a trembling maid. I wonder who will be next to discover profit in tears. Rosalind saw Annie flinch. That decided her. Enough. The word rang sharper than she intended, and the room obeyed it for one stunned second. You may insult me because you have practiced for years, but you will not insult a servant who risks more than any of us by speaking. Annie has no title to shield her, no mother's family to excuse her, no drawing room full of people waiting to admire her distress. She has only the truth. That should be enough. Lady Alderwick, seated near the card table, lowered her lorgnette. It is an impressive speech, Miss Fairbourne. It is not a speech, ma'am. It is a request that we remember she is a person. That landed more heavily than Rosalind expected. The thrill in the room dimmed. For a moment, the witnesses seemed less hungry. Annie looked down, and one tear slipped free despite all her effort to prevent it. Benedict crossed to the side table, took a clean handkerchief, and offered it not to Rosalind, but to Annie. He did so without flourish, without lowering himself theatrically, without making compassion into a performance. "Take it," he said. Annie accepted with shaking fingers. "Thank you, Your Grace." Lady Priscilla's control was beginning to fray at the edges. Rosalind could see it in the tightening of her fan, the too smooth set of her mouth, the way her gaze moved from Benedict to the Dowager Duchess and back again. She had expected tears to work. She had expected rank to protect her daughters. She had not expected a maid to be treated like a witness. "This proves nothing final," Lady Priscilla said. "A seal may be seen. A desk may be approached. An impression may be imagined by a frightened servant hoping to elevate herself." Benedict turned the forged note in his hand. "It proves enough to require a formal account from every person who had access to Wetherbourne's writing room. And will you interrogate every maid and footman in Mayfair? If necessary." Lady Priscilla's smile returned, but it had lost its polish. "Then, perhaps, before Your Grace proceeds, we should discuss what kind of young woman you are defending so fiercely." Rosalind felt the shift before the words came. Sybil looked at her mother with sudden alarm. Lavinia whispered, "Mamma, don't." Lady Priscilla ignored her. "There are matters regarding Rosalind's birth that Sir Edmund was too honourable to expose while he lived. Matters that might make certain ambitions impossible, even under a duke's cloak." The sentence struck the room differently from every accusation before it. It reached backward, beyond the torn gown, beyond the forged note, beyond the stolen dowry, into the place where a woman's name was made before she had any say in it. Rosalind went cold. Not because she believed it. Because she did not know what Lady Priscilla might have hidden well enough to make others believe. Benedict took one step toward Lady Priscilla. The movement was small, but the danger in it was unmistakable. "You will choose your next words with care." "I always do, Your Grace." "Not always successfully." The Dowager Duchess came forward then, her silver gown catching candlelight. "Lady Priscilla, if you intend to make a claim concerning a deceased baronet's daughter, you will do so before proper witnesses, with documents, names, and a solicitor present. You will not poison a room with half a sentence and call it concern." Lady Priscilla curtsied, but the gesture had more defiance than respect. "As Your Grace wishes." "I have no desire to distress dear Rosalind further tonight." Rosalind almost laughed at the tenderness of dear. Instead, she looked at Sybil. Her stepsister's face was no longer triumphant. It was frightened, not for Rosalind, for herself. That fear reminded Rosalind of the missing ribbon. Annie seemed to remember at the same moment. She clutched the Duke's handkerchief and said, "Miss Fairbourne." Her voice was small, but the room was listening now. "There is something else." Lady Priscilla's head snapped toward her. "You have said quite enough," Annie swallowed. Benedict's voice steadied the air. "Continue. The piece of ribbon from the gown. I saw Miss Sybil with it after the rout." "Not that night in the gallery, but yesterday morning. She had it in her reticule when she came through the servants' passage at Wetherbourne House with Miss Lavinia. I noticed because it was tied around her vinaigrette, like a little trophy." Sybil's fan stopped moving. Rosalind felt the words enter her slowly. trophy. Her mother's ribbon, carried as a trophy by the girl who had smiled while old silk tore. Lady Marchvale said softly, "Miss Sybil, perhaps you will allow us to see your reticule." "Absolutely not," Sybil's voice cracked. Then she seemed to hear herself and lowered it. "A lady's personal effects are not to be searched because a maid invents stories." Lady Alderwick leaned forward. "But if the story is invented, proving so would be simple." Sybil looked to her mother, but Lady Priscilla's face had gone carefully blank. That was answer enough for those who knew how to read silence. Benedict did not demand the reticule. He looked at Rosalind. "Do you wish to pursue this here?" The question was another kind of cloak, offered without being forced around her shoulders. Rosalind could feel every eye waiting for her to choose anger, collapse, or mercy convenient to others. She chose neither. "No," she said, "not here. Not as a spectacle for people who found my shame more interesting than my truth." Several guests had the grace to look away. "Then where?" Benedict asked. "In a room where everyone who speaks must answer for it." Lady Marchvale nodded once. "Wetherbourne House." The Dowager Duchess's voice followed, precise and final. "Tomorrow afternoon. My drawing room. Lady Priscilla, you will attend with your daughters. I shall invite a solicitor, Madame Celeste Annivale, and those witnesses my son deems necessary." Lady Priscilla smiled as if she had won a concession rather than been summoned. "Of course. And I shall bring what I possess concerning Rosalind's birth." Rosalind did not move. Inside something shook. Benedict saw it, and for one aching second his face changed. The cold Duke vanished, and the man beneath nearly stepped toward her. Nearly. Then he stopped himself. He remembered the blue sitting room. He remembered the wrong offer. He remembered that rescue could become another cage. "Miss Fairbourne," he said quietly, "shall my carriage take you and Lady Marchvale home?" "Yes, thank you." Her voice held. He heard what it cost. In the hall beyond the assembly room, while Lady Marchvale retrieved her cloak, and the footman pretended not to listen, Benedict stood beside Rosalind beneath a narrow mirror. Their reflections appeared together for the first time. Dark coat and grey gown, power and restraint, two people surrounded by whispers, and not speaking any of the words that mattered most. "I am sorry," he said, "for Annie, for not understanding sooner how many ways silence can be forced." Rosalind looked down at her gloves. "You understood enough to stop speaking for me." "Not enough." The confession was quiet. It carried no self-pity. That made it difficult to resist. She turned toward him. "You almost said something in there. Yes, why didn't you?" His throat moved once. "Because you deserve choices more than declarations made in rooms that have hurt you." Her heart answered before she could forbid it. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw. Outside, the carriage waited. Inside, Sybil stood behind a half-closed door and opened her reticule with shaking hands. The ivory ribbon was gone. The ivory ribbon did not return to Sybil's reticule, and by morning that absence had become a presence in every room Rosalind entered. Lady Marchvale's house felt safer than Fairbourne's, but safety had begun to trouble Rosalind almost as much as danger. It tempted a person to sit still. It whispered that if one had survived humiliation, one need not walk back toward it. She stood in Lady Marchvale's small breakfast parlour, with the curtains half drawn against a pale London sun. Benedict's cloak folded over the chair beside her, and the paper from Madame Celeste tucked inside her reticule. Across from her, Lady Marchvale read a note from the Dowager Duchess, while Benedict stood near the mantel, his posture controlled, and his face marked by the strain of a man who had spent the night deciding how not to command. "My mother has sent for Hargreaves," he said. "He is our family solicitor, discreet, precise, and unamused by theatrics. If you wish it, he can begin inquiries without requiring you to face Lady Priscilla again tomorrow." Rosalind looked at him. "Without requiring me?" "Yes. And with what result?" "Pressure." He did not soften the word, a private demand for return of the dowry. "Written statements taken from Madame Celeste and Annie. A warning to Lady Priscilla that further slander will bring consequences she cannot manage." Lady Marchvale set down the note. That would frighten many women into retreat. Lady Priscilla is not many women, Rosalind said. No, Benedict replied, but she understands exposure. Rosalind moved to the window. A maid was crossing the square with a basket over one arm, her cap strings stirred by the wind. The ordinary world had continued its ordinary errands, while Rosalind's life rearranged itself around torn silk and accusations. She had thought, years ago, that courage would feel like heat. Instead, it felt cold and clear. If you settle it quietly, what will London know? Benedict's silence answered before he did. Enough, he said. Not enough. She turned. They saw me in the gallery. They saw the gown. They heard the whispers. They heard I may have written a note. They heard I may have invented a stolen dowry. They heard, last night, that there may be some stain upon my birth. Her voice did not break, though the last word tried to take it from her. If the humiliation was public enough to stain me, the truth must be public enough to free me. Lady Marchvale's face softened. Child. No, Rosalind said it gently, because Lady Marchvale had earned gentleness. I am tired of being handled gently only after being treated cruelly. I do not want a private repair that leaves the public wound intact. Benedict came one step away from the mantel, then stopped himself. She saw the restraint and understood how much effort it cost him. You would choose the room, he asked. Yes, Wetherbourne House. Yes, where it began. Where they thought I would be too ashamed to stand again. His eyes held hers. You know what Lady Priscilla will bring. The accusation about my birth. Yes, then we must bring my mother's letter. Lady Marchvale frowned. You have not read all of it, I know. The admission settled heavily. The sealed portion of her mother's packet had remained unopened because Rosalind had feared that grief, once invited, would sit down and refuse to leave. She had read the inventory, the trust provision, the solicitor's note. She had not read the final letter addressed in her mother's hand, to my dearest Rosalind, when choice is demanded of you. That morning the letter waited on the writing desk, its seal unbroken, gentle, and terrible. Benedict looked toward it. You do not have to read it before witnesses. I will read it before I go. And if it hurts you, then it will hurt me before the truth does. He looked as if he wanted to cross the room and take every cruel possibility from her hands. He did not. Instead, he asked, What do you require of me? The question was so different from his earlier offer that Rosalind felt its quiet force. No rescue arranged over her head. No marriage built like a wall around scandal. No ducal certainty dressed as kindness. Only a question. Your drawing room, she said. Your mother, Lady Marchvale. Mr. Hargreaves. Madame Celeste, if she will come. Annie. But only if her position is already protected. It is. Mr. Vale, because he can speak to the seal. Mrs. Hensley, because she examined the gown. Lady Priscilla, Sybil, and Lavinia. And the gown? She looked at the cloak over the chair, then at the desk where the ribbon and letter waited. The gown should remain at Wetherbourne House. But I will carry the ribbon myself. Benedict's expression changed. Not approval alone. Recognition. Very well. Lady Marchvale rose with a faint groan of age and determination. Then we shall have the proper room, the proper witnesses, and the improper truth. I have always found that combination effective. Rosalind almost smiled, but the letter on the desk called her attention like a voice from another life. She crossed to it before fear could rearrange itself into delay. Her fingers broke the seal carefully. The handwriting was faded, but steady, each line shaped by a woman who had known she might not be present when the words were needed. My dearest Rosalind, if this letter has reached your hands, someone has made you doubt what you are. Remember this first. You are my lawful daughter, born in honor, loved before birth, and cherished beyond my strength to remain. Your father knew every truth of my life, and chose me before God and law. Do not permit anyone who envies your gentleness to rename it weakness. Do not enter marriage as payment for shelter. Do not accept dependence from those who call it duty. If you marry, let it be by choice, and let the man who takes your hand know that your worth did not begin when he noticed it. The room blurred. Rosalind pressed the page once to her heart. Not. theatrically, not for the others, but because the child inside her who had kept that ribbon in a box needed one private second with the mother who had known the exact lie that might someday be used against her. Lady Marchvale looked away. Benedict did not. His gaze remained steady, not intruding, not pitying, bearing witness, because witness was what he had learned she wanted. Rosalind folded the letter and placed it in her reticule beside the Modista's paper. "Now," she said. "Now I am ready." The summons went out by noon, each note formal enough to leave no opening for refusal. Lady Priscilla replied within the hour, accepting with cool dignity, and adding that she would be grateful for the opportunity to correct several sentimental misunderstandings. Sybil sent no answer of her own. Lavinia sent none. Madame Celeste agreed to attend, provided her business name was treated with discretion. Annie agreed only after Benedict's written reference for Larkmere Park was placed in Mr. Vale's hands and a copy given to her. By 3 o'clock, Wetherbourne House had changed from the place of spectacle into the place of reckoning. The drawing-room was not the gallery where the gown had torn, but it overlooked the same square and held the same disciplined grandeur. Mrs. Hensley had arranged chairs with the precision of a woman who understood that order could lend courage to truth. The Dowager Duchess sat near the hearth, silver-haired and still. Mr. Hargreaves, dry as old parchment and twice as sharp, placed his papers on a small table. Lady Marchvale took the chair nearest Rosalind, without asking whether she was needed. Benedict stood beside the empty space reserved for Rosalind, then looked down at her as she entered with the torn ivory ribbon in her gloved hand. "Before they arrive," he said quietly, "tell me where you want me." The question passed beneath every sound in the room. Behind her would mean shelter. Before her would mean command. Far away would mean abandonment disguised as respect. Rosalind looked at the ribbon, then at the man who had once covered her shame and was now asking how to stand near her truth. "Beside me," she said. His answer was immediate. "Then beside you I shall be." She took her place. The ribbon lay across her palm, small enough to be dismissed by anyone who did not know how much cruelty could be tied into a narrow strip of silk. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Lavinia's voice came first, thin and nervous. Sybil's followed, low and urgent. Then the butler opened the door and announced Lady Priscilla Fairbourne with her daughters. Lady Priscilla entered Wetherbourne House, smiling, as if she had already won. Lady Priscilla entered as if the drawing-room had been prepared for her vindication, rather than her accounting. She wore violet silk and mourning pearls, a costume of injured respectability, chosen with such care that Rosalind almost admired the calculation. Sybil followed in blue, her colour high and her eyes restless. Lavinia came last, pale enough that the rose ribbons on her gown seemed too bright for her face. The door closed behind them, and Wetherbourne House held its breath. The Dowager Duchess did not rise. Benedict stood beside Rosalind, not before her, not behind her, exactly where she had asked him to stand. On the small table near Mr. Hargreaves lay the folded note, the Modista's ledger copy, the paper twist holding ivory threads, Mrs. Hensley's written account of the gown, and Rosalind's mother's letter. The torn ribbon rested in Rosalind's palm. Lady Priscilla curtsied to the Dowager, then to Benedict. "Your Graces, I trust this distressing performance may now conclude." Lady Marchville's fan opened with a soft snap. Performances usually begin with the person most eager to be believed. "Then perhaps Rosalind should start," Lady Priscilla said. "She has had such success recently in commanding sympathy." Rosalind felt the sting, but it did not enter deeply. She had carried worse words in silence. Today she had not come to be silent. "I did not ask anyone here to pity me," she said. "I asked that what was done in public be answered with truth." Lady Priscilla looked around the room. "Truth? Very well. The truth is that my stepdaughter has turned a domestic embarrassment into a ladder. A torn gown became a ducal cloak. A family account became a theft. A childish note became a forgery. One might call her unfortunate. One might also call her ambitious. Benedict's hand remained at his side, but Rosalind sensed the restraint in him. She drew strength from it, not because he would rescue her, but because he would wait while she rescued herself. "Mr. Hargreaves," she said, "will you begin with my mother's provision?" The solicitor adjusted his spectacles and lifted the inventory. The late Lady Fairbourne, born Miss Helena Whitcomb, left a settled sum for her daughter Rosalind's presentation, clothing, and marriage portion. The money was modest but sufficient. It was to be held until Miss Fairbourne entered society or married. Lady Priscilla smiled thinly. Households require flexibility after bereavement. The document does not grant flexibility to spend the sum on other daughters, Mr. Hargreaves said, nor on gowns ordered for Miss Sybil and Miss Lavinia. Sybil's eyes flashed. We needed proper clothes. Rosalind never cared for society. Rosalind looked at her. I was told there was no money for me to care with. Lavinia whispered, Sybil, don't. The Dowager Duchess said, continue. Madame Celeste stepped forward, gloved hands clasped before her. She looked nervous, but not uncertain. The blue gown and rose gown were altered through my shop. A payment was made under Miss Sybil Fairbourne's account for the handling and removal of ivory trimming. I kept a sample because the request was unusual. A sample, Lady Priscilla said with a laugh like glass. A scrap proves nothing. Rosalind placed the torn ribbon on the table. Madame Celeste opened the paper twist. The small sliver inside matched the broken edge almost perfectly. Old ivory against old ivory, the weave unmistakable, Mrs. Hensley came next, practical and calm. The gown was not merely old, my lady. The fastening had been weakened. The ribbon edge was cut with small, sharp scissors. The fabric gave way when pressure was applied. Lady Priscilla's face did not change. That was how Rosalind knew the blow had landed. "And the pressure?" the Dowager asked Mrs. Hensley glanced once at Rosalind before answering. From behind and below, a foot on the hem would hold the skirt. A hand at the ribbon would finish it. Lavinia made a small sound. Sybil seized it at once. "This is speculation, servants and shopkeepers repeating what they have been told to see." Benedict's voice was low. "Be careful, Miss Sybil." She turned on him, panic-loosening manners. "Why? Because you prefer her version?" "Because she stood there looking tragic and made you feel noble." Rosalind stepped forward before Benedict could reply. "No. Because every time you speak, you come closer to telling the truth." Sybil's mouth opened. No answer came. Mr. Vale placed the forged note on the table. "The seal impression matches the desk seal from His Grace's private writing room. That seal was missing the morning after the route and returned before noon. Annie Vale saw Miss Lavinia near that writing desk while fresh candles were being carried in. Annie stood near Mrs. Hensley, small and frightened, but she lifted her chin. "I saw her, my lady. I'm sorry, but I did." Lavinia's eyes filled. I didn't know what Sybil meant to do with it. The room went utterly still. Sybil turned toward her. "Lavinia." "I didn't," Lavinia said, voice breaking. "You said it was only to make the note seem important. You said Mama would make sure no one questioned it." Lady Priscilla's mask shifted at last. Not shattered, shifted. Hysterics are not confession. "No," Rosalind said, "but truth often begins where control ends." Lady Priscilla's gaze snapped to her. "You dare speak to me of truth? Shall we discuss your birth, then? Shall we read every letter your mother wrote while Sir Edmund was away from Fairbourne Hall?" The final weapon entered the room with a hiss. Sybil looked relieved. Lavinia looked sick. Rosalind lifted her mother's letter. "Yes," she said. Lady Priscilla's expression faltered. "What? Let us discuss it. That is why you saved the accusation, is it not? You believed shame would frighten me more than facts." She handed the letter to Mr. Hargreaves. "Read the passage concerning my father." The solicitor unfolded it. His voice was dry, steady, and merciless to performance. "Your father knew every truth of my life and chose me before God and law. You are my lawful daughter, born in honor, loved before birth, and cherished beyond my strength to remain." The room changed, not with noise, with recognition. Lady Priscilla's last shadow had been dragged into daylight and found empty. Benedict looked at Rosalind, and the pride in his eyes nearly stole her breath. Lady Priscilla tried to gather herself. A sentimental letter from a dying woman cannot erase questions. Mr. Hargreaves lifted another paper. The marriage register, baptismal notation, and Sir Edmund's own signed acknowledgement are present in the packet you concealed. There is no question. Lady Marchvale closed her fan. Only malice dressed as one. Sybil began to cry then, but the tears came angrily. It wasn't supposed to go so far. She was not supposed to be chosen by anyone. She was supposed to look foolish. Just foolish. Rosalind turned to her slowly. Why? The question was soft. That made it worse. Sybil wiped at her cheek. Because you stood there, as if old silken silence made you better than us. Because he looked at you. Because Mama said if the Duke noticed you, everything we had spent would be wasted. Sybil, Lady Priscilla warned. Lavinia burst out. You told us to do it. You said Rosalind must be reminded that rooms like that weren't for her. Lady Priscilla's face hardened into something almost naked. I preserved this family. You spent my mother's money, Rosalind said. You hid her letter. You let your daughters tear her gown from me in a room full of witnesses. I gave you shelter. No, Rosalind said. You gave me use. Shelter does not require a woman to be grateful for being diminished. The Dowager Duchess rose. Every person in the room seemed to remember rank at once. Lady Priscilla Fairbourne, you and your daughters will no longer be received under Wetherbourne protection. I shall inform those houses whose invitations matter that the matter has been examined before witnesses, and that Miss Rosalind Fairbourne was wronged. Lady Priscilla went pale. Your Grace cannot mean to ruin 2 young women for one indiscretion. Benedict spoke then, and his voice held the authority of the house, the title, and the man who had watched restraint become justice. This was not one indiscretion. It was theft, forgery, public cruelty, and slander. Mr. Hargreaves will see Miss Fairbourne's portion restored through proper channels. Until recovery is complete, Wetherbourne will advance the sum to her account, not as charity, but as recognition of what was withheld. Rosalind turned to him sharply. Your Grace, he faced her at once. Only if you permit it. The room witnessed the question. Rosalind understood the gift inside it. Not money, choice. Until recovery is complete, she said, and recorded as debt owed by Lady Priscilla's household, not by me. Benedict's mouth softened almost invisibly. As you wish. Lady Priscilla looked toward the door, as if she might leave through dignity alone. The Dowager's voice stopped her. You may withdraw when Mr. Hargreaves has your acknowledgement that the accusation regarding Miss Fairbourne's birth was false. Lady Priscilla stared. You ask me to sign humiliation, Rosalind answered before anyone else could. No, I ask you to stop lending humiliation my name. That ended it. Not with applause, not with shouting, with ink. Lady Priscilla signed because refusal would damn her further. Sybil signed a statement regarding the Modiste account with shaking fury. Lavinia, weeping quietly now, admitted to taking the seal impression after Sybil urged her, and Lady Priscilla approved the plan. When they were gone, the room felt larger. Rosalind stood very still, emptied by victory and steadied by it. Benedict came beside her. You stood alone before I ever stood near you, he said quietly. Do not give me credit for your courage. She looked at him, and all the rooms of the past seemed to fall away from her shoulders. I would rather stand alone than be chosen wrongly. Then hear me carefully. His voice lowered, but every word was clear. I do not choose the scandal that brought you here. I do not choose your injury, or your gratitude, or the usefulness others took from you. I choose your courage, your mercy, your mind, the woman who mended a glove when no one thought to thank her. The woman who protected a maid while her own name was under attack. The woman who was worthy before I knew enough to see it. Rosalind's eyes burned, but she did not look away. And what do you ask? Nothing today. The answer trembled at the edge of tenderness. Only that you come to Larkmere Park when you are ready, with every propriety, and see the home I would be honored to share if you ever choose me freely. She held the torn ribbon in her hand and felt for the first time that it no longer bound her to grief alone. Then I will come, she said. Not because I need shelter. Benedict bowed over her hand without touching it. Because you are free to choose. 3 weeks after the drawing-room reckoning, Rosalind left London in a carriage that did not feel like an escape. Lady Marchvale sat opposite her with a travelling rug over her knees and a basket of almond biscuits beside her, declaring every 10 miles that Hampshire air was more honest than Mayfair conversation. The Dowager Duchess had sent her own maid to accompany them, and Mr. Hargreaves had arranged every point of propriety so thoroughly that no gossip sheet could twist the visit into scandal without embarrassing itself. London had already begun correcting its tone. Lady Priscilla no longer received cards from the houses whose doors mattered most. Sybil and Lavinia had been withdrawn from the season under the excuse of fragile nerves, though everyone understood that fragile reputations were the real ailment. The first portion of Rosalind's stolen dowry had been restored through the solicitor's account, with the remainder formally owed by Lady Priscilla's household. No apology had arrived. Rosalind had stopped waiting for one. Some women offered remorse only when it could buy them sympathy, and Rosalind had no wish to be purchased again. Larkmere Park appeared near late afternoon, beyond a turn of road bordered by beeches and stone walls, silvered with age. The house was not as grand as Wetherbourne House in London, but it carried a steadier dignity. Honey-coloured stone rose above green lawns, with ivy trained neatly along the east wing and a long terrace facing fields that rolled toward a distant line of trees. It looked lived in, not displayed. That was the first thing Rosalind noticed. The second was Benedict standing on the front steps without a hat, as if patience had finally become too difficult to practice indoors. Lady Marchvale saw him and gave a satisfied sniff. There is a man trying very hard not to look as if he has counted the minutes. Rosalind's gloved hand tightened around the ribbon hidden in her reticule. My lady, do not my lady me. I am old, not blind. Benedict came down the steps as the carriage stopped. He helped Lady Marchvale first, because propriety demanded it, and because he was wise enough to know she would scold him if he did not. Then he turned to Rosalind. He offered his hand, not as possession, but as steadiness. Miss Fairbourne, your grace, welcome to Larkmere. She placed her hand in his and stepped down. No crowd watched. No candles burned above eager faces. No one whispered that old silk could not bear attention. Yet the quiet of the moment held more weight than any crowded room she had survived. The servants stood assembled in the hall, led by Mrs. Hensley, who had come down from London to oversee the visit. Annie Vale stood near the end of the line in a neat cap, eyes bright with shy pride. She looked healthier already, her fear not gone, but no longer ruling her posture. Rosalind crossed to her before greeting the portraits or admiring the staircase. Annie, she said softly. I am glad to see you well, Annie curtsied. I'm very well, miss. Mrs. Hensley says I might be useful in the linen room if I learn properly, Mrs. Hensley gave a severe nod that did not hide approval. The girl has quick hands and a memory for order. Then Larkmere is fortunate, Rosalind said. Annie's smile trembled, but this time it did not break. Benedict watched the exchange from a few feet away, and Rosalind understood that he had arranged more than safety. He had given Annie a future that did not require gratitude to be silent. The house tour was brief because Benedict did not bury feeling under endless corridors. He showed Rosalind the morning room, where the light was best, the small library with worn leather chairs and a window overlooking the orchard, and the sewing room his mother had once used before London duties claimed her. The sewing room stopped Rosalind at the threshold. It was not large, perhaps 12 feet wide, with shelves for folded fabric, a long work table, and drawers labelled in careful handwriting. Sunlight rested on a row of spools. A plain wooden chair sat near the window. Nothing about the room was grand, yet Rosalind felt her throat tighten. Here was labour treated as skill, not invisibility. Here were mending, making, and keeping valued enough to have their own place. Benedict did not step too close. My mother said this room has been unused for too long. She thought you might advise how it could serve better. Rosalind touched the edge of the work table. Serve whom? Women with little dowry, uncertain family support, or no safe place to learn work that preserves dignity. A sewing trust, perhaps. Paid training, proper references, and commissions from houses that can afford to be useful. She looked at him. You have thought about this. I have thought about what power failed to notice until you made me see it. I did not make you. No, he said. You stood where I could no longer pretend not to look. The honesty moved through her more gently than praise. And I would direct this trust, only if you choose. If not, it will be arranged in another form. I am not offering a duty disguised as a gift. She looked back at the shelves, at the clean table, at the sunlight ready for hands and fabric, and second chances. I would like to try. His answer was quiet. Then, it is yours to shape. Later, after tea with Lady Marchvale and the Dowager Duchess in the morning room, Benedict asked whether Rosalind wished to see the chapel. Lady Marchvale immediately discovered a pressing need to rest her ankles. The Dowager claimed letters demanded attention. Rosalind suspected conspiracy, but it was a well-chaperoned conspiracy for Mrs. Hensley remained within sight, at the far end of the terrace, while Benedict walked with Rosalind through the garden path. The chapel stood beyond a low yew hedge, small and old, with clear windows and a wooden door darkened by generations of hands. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stone, beeswax and lavender from a vase near the altar. Rosalind stepped into the aisle and felt no fear. That surprised her. Once, any sacred room might have reminded her of judgment, of names spoken over women by people who held power over their futures. This one felt different. It asked nothing before offering quiet. Benedict stood beside her. I brought something. He held out his cloak, the same dark cloak, the one that had covered her when the room waited to devour her. Rosalind looked at it and felt the past rise, then settle. I thought I had returned it. You did. He unfolded it carefully. I asked Mrs. Hensley to alter one thing with your permission, requested. Too late and forgiveness hoped for. Inside the lining, near the place where it would rest over his heart, a narrow strip of ivory ribbon had been sewn with tiny, careful stitches. Not the whole ribbon, not enough to steal memory from Rosalind, only the torn piece that had survived evidence, accusation, and truth. It lay against the dark silk like a small flame that had refused to be put out. Rosalind touched it with one fingertip. You kept the wound. No, Benedict said. I kept the witness. Her eyes lifted to his. Why? Because that night did not begin your worth, and this ribbon must never be remembered only for the hands that tried to shame you. It belonged to your mother. It covered you when cruelty tore at what she left. It proved the truth when liars hoped evidence was too small to matter. His voice lowered. And it reminds me that protection is not the same as choice. Rosalind breathed carefully. You learned that painfully. You taught it mercifully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, wind moved through the yew hedge. Somewhere beyond the chapel, Lady Marchville's laugh carried faintly across the garden, quickly followed by the Dowager's lower reply. Life waited there, practical and imperfect, not a dream, but a home being offered by a man who had learned to ask. Benedict took one step back, giving Rosalind space enough to refuse before he said anything that might alter them. Rosalind, I love you. I loved your courage before I dared call it love. I loved the way you saw servants as people, the way you answered insult without becoming cruel, the way you chose truth when shelter would have been easier. I do not ask because scandal requires repair. It does not own you. I do not ask because gratitude binds you. It does not. I ask because I would be honored to spend my life beside the woman you already are. Her hand remained on the ribbon. And if I said no? His face tightened with pain, but his answer came without hesitation. Then Larkmere would still be open to your trust. Your portion would still be restored, Annie would remain protected, and my respect would not diminish by 1 inch. That was when Rosalind knew. Not because he loved her enough to ask, but because he loved her enough to leave the door open after refusal. Tears came then, quiet and unashamed. I spent so long being useful that I forgot what it might mean to be wanted. You were wanted before anyone deserved to say so. She smiled through the tears. I'm not certain you deserve to say so now. The corner of his mouth softened. Then I'll spend my life improving my claim. Rosalind looked once around the chapel, then back at the man who had first seen her in a corner and had learned not to drag her from it, but to stand where the light could reach them both. Yes, she said, not because I need rescue, not because London has been corrected, not because a duke asked and a woman should be grateful. She placed her hand in his. Because I choose you. Benedict bowed over her hand, and this time he touched his lips to her glove with a reverence that felt like a vow already spoken. Weeks later, London would learn of the engagement through a proper notice and pretend it had always admired Miss Rosalind Fairbourne. Lady Priscilla would read it in a house grown smaller by exclusion. Sybil and Lavinia would understand, perhaps for the first time, that humiliation had not made their stepsister less. It had shown everyone else what she had survived. But in that chapel, there was no audience to correct, no villain to answer, no whisper to endure. There was only Rosalind walking back into the Hampshire light beside Benedict, the dark cloak around her shoulders for warmth rather than shame, and the ivory ribbon hidden close to his heart, no longer a remnant of what had been torn, but a promise of what had been restored.